Hey, hey.
Hey,
You hear me
can you hear
okay?
me? Yeah.
I can hear you. Wonderful. It's good to see you. Finally meet.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I know, kind of met,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah,
Long time
that's a
ago.
long, long time ago. So when was that? That
Yeah.
was in Arizona, right?
Yeah, I was in Arizona. We had the Arizona School of Supernatural
That's right.
Ministry hosted at
Yeah.
our church, and you came and spoke, and that was like the first time anyone had ever given me permission to question anything in that arena.
Wow. I can't
Yeah.
even remember what I would have even spoke about. It was particularly because I was
Yeah.
still very much like, oh, charismatic, supernatural
Yep.
school. I'll, be very careful what I say.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, so I clearly didn't
Yeah.
do too well at that, but
I don't even remember. I wish I thought about it. I was like, I wonder if I still have like the notes that I took,
oh,
but
that'd be so funny.
who knows? I don't know if I kept
Probably
them or
burnt most of those journals, right?
yeah. But yeah, I remember you talking and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I've thought about this. Like he's saying it's okay to ask the questions. No one's ever said that. And the pastor of the church is there like, uh, and what about blah 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 blah. And I don't know.
That's
There was
so
a little part
funny.
of me that reveled in the fact that he was uncomfortable because I was like, yes, somebody's saying something.
That's so funny. I remember that trip was this girl that I knew from Bethel called
Mhm.
Phyllis. She
Phyllis,
passed
yeah,
away, didn't she? Like
yes,
a few years ago. Really crazy circumstance, really. But she like just basically was like, fly into Phoenix, I'll pick you up and I will drive you around all these churches that I do a
yeah.
supernatural school at. And I was like, okay, cool. So I just showed up and we just start going around these churches. But I don't know anyone at these churches. And
Sure.
I don't really, usually if I go to a church and speak or something back in the day when I did that more, I'd like meet the pastor, I'd talk to the pastor, I'd get to know the pastor, or the pastor would invite me. So he's following me for a while. So like, you just kind of have an idea of what's going on in this church. What's it like?
Yeah.
All I knew is like, oh, Phyllis is running a school here and she likes me. So I'm sure I can just do what I want. But even like when the pastor's there in the room, I'm like, I don't even know which person in this room is the pastor,
Is
or even if the
yeah.
pastor's here, maybe the pastor doesn't come to this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just really, yeah, it's funny to think of like pastors squirming in the front row. I've made a lot of pastors squirm. I'm pretty confident.
Sure.
I probably make much more pastors squirm these days, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's funny.
probably. But yeah,
Wow.
I followed you ever since then, and you know, there was a time somewhere in the middle that I was like, oh, should I still follow? But I'm glad I did. So
Yeah, here we are. Like, it's amazing as well, like, because you've been tracking with me a long time. I mean, I've only been doing this for like 10, 11 years. So you've pretty much
yeah.
been with me the whole time. And I probably had started deconstructing at that point, but I was very conscious that my audience were not people ready to deconstruct, right?
Hmm.
Realistically.
Yeah.
Um, so it was consciously a thing of like, okay, how do I present something to them that will move them from wherever they are into something I might find, I might, in my very wise and amazing way where I know what's right for people. Of course I don't,
Mm.
but I might be able to go, well, I think this would be healthier. I think this might bring more freedom to them, might, give them a bit more room to breathe, to explore. And so like trying to figure out where do you plant these like tiny little seeds when in your own head, you're like, I am not in this place at all. Like I don't belong here. This is
Yeah.
kind of crazy. That was a really weird season for me that you kind of first met. And then you've
I
kind of
bet.
like along the way seen me slowly kind of emerge at the cocoon and go, I'm a bit more like this and a bit more like, and then eventually be like, okay, this is who you're getting, guys. I feel like I've dragged as many people as I could with me. The rest are going to leave anyway. So here we are.
Yeah.
So that's so funny that like, yeah, I don't think there's many people that have held on and
That
tracked
long.
me
Yeah.
that long. I think a lot of people were done halfway through going, maybe I should unfollow this guy. So,
Heretic.
well done. I'm
Heretic.
impressed. Yeah. So,
Uh,
that's
yeah.
funny. Wow. So that was 8 years ago and you were doing a supernatural school. So did you kind of grow up in the kind of charismatic Christian world? Were you kind of Christian upbringing?
Yeah, some, well, mostly, I guess. My parents were not believers when I
Okay.
was young, and I was 4 years old. My dad grew up in a well, not my dad grew up with his mom going to church, very old school Pentecostal. women didn't wear makeup, wore dresses. You had long hair, but you wore it in a bun always.
Right.
And then my mom grew up where my mom's family is Cajun. So there's a lot of Catholicism in the culture, but it was like a, Easter, Christmas, Mass kind of thing. They didn't really practice it in everyday life. And my dad, he had to go to church as a child with his mom, but nothing really stuck there.
Right.
So
didn't click.
yeah. So here I am, I'm 4 years old, and my paternal grandmother would sometimes take me for the weekend to church, and my mom hated it, not because of the church part so much, but because she would dress me exactly like her. So I would come home with these like frilly dresses and giant collars and hair up in a bun, and my
That's
mom would
hilarious.
just be like, "I'm taking your hair down right now. Go change." But I really liked church, and in hindsight, I don't know what I think I just enjoyed being able to be with my friends and hear stories, and things weren't really great at my house, honestly. As much as I kind of, with where I am now with faith and spirituality, kind of wish the following events had not happened, but they did. I think they saved the family unit in the sense of like my parents were certainly on the road to divorce. They each have their own vices and mental health issues, and who knows what would have happened if they hadn't had this like sudden radical change when they did. But I was an only child at the time. I have a brother. He's 6 years younger than me. And once a month on Sunday, we had what was called Brittany Day. And I got to pick wherever I wanted to go, the zoo, amusement park, whatever. And on this particular day at 4 years old, I was like, I want to go to church. And my parents were like, what? No.
You didn't understand. The options were the zoo,
the zoo,
like
the
park.
We'll go eat at
No,
McDonald's.
church. Definitely church. You're like a weird 4-year-old, right? It's like, what have we done? How did we raise this?
I was also a very stubborn and literal child.
So
I feel really sorry for my mom. She thought I was really rebellious, and I was really just, she's like, you can't touch the stove. And I'm like, yes, I can. Whereas if she was like, you shouldn't touch the stove because it's hot, and I would have been like, okay.
That's funny.
Anyway, they were like, no, you don't want to go to church. And I'm like, yes, I do. I want to go to church. I was dead set on it. It was too late to go that day, and we ended up going nowhere. But they promised me that the next Brittany Day, if I still wanted to go to church, we would go. So I held on to that. We're going to church. I'll never forget that Sunday. We woke up early. My mom made blueberry muffins, which then subsequently became like the Sunday morning meal.
Nice.
And we got all dressed up, and my dad got beeped out, back in the beeper days. So he got called out to work last minute. I started crying. Mom was like, what's the matter? And I was like, Daddy's going to work. We're not going to church. And she was like, well, I got dressed up, so let's just go. So my mom and I went. We met my dad for lunch afterwards. He asked how it was. Mom was like, it wasn't bad. And he was like, okay, we'll go as a family next week. And so we all went the following week, and then we never stopped going.
Wow. There you go.
But yeah, there was definitely, I can't pinpoint everything exactly that happened, but my mom officially converted, said the sinner's prayer, whatever. I think it was like 3 weeks in. Wow. And just cold turkey, quit all the drugs, quit alcohol. She was an alcoholic for sure. And my dad came home one day and saw her just like dumping out all of the alcohol and was like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I got saved. We can't do this anymore, which is a whole other conversation. But my dad saw such a major change in my mom's attitude in that 1 week, then he decided to the following week. And then they were like, do you want to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit? And he was like, yeah. And so they did that, and then he started speaking in
Mm.
tongues, and my mom's like, what's that? And and then we burned all of our cassette tapes and records, and what was it, got rid of the TV, and here we were.
Oh man, no records, no TV, no
Nope.
drugs, no alcohol. It's like
Yep.
twiddling your thumbs in an empty room now.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Wow.
uh
That
yeah.
sounds incredible. I mean, like, I know, like, everyone in this movement loves to shit all over the church and go, oh, look how terrible church is. And it's like
Mhm.
scarred us and traumatized us. And all of that is probably very, very true. I'm not taking that
Yeah.
away. But it does show that there are people at stages of life where church is the right thing. It might not be the best healthy thing that someone who is on the other side would somehow custom make for your parents at that point. Maybe they
Mhm.
would have come up with some sort of, 12-step program, kind of devoid of church and a therapy and, family counseling. Well, I don't know, I mean, maybe someone would come up with something that's maybe better, but at the end of the day, this was a really potentially a great thing.
Yeah.
And we're so black and white with going, oh, church is bad,
Yeah.
this is better. But actually, it's not always necessarily the wrong thing for everyone. And maybe
No.
sometimes the right step for people. Sorry, anyway, it's a segue, but it's just, I think that's so important to kind of acknowledge at times as well, especially when we're trying to integrate that right in our own lives and go, how do I even like this thing? I hate
Yeah,
that.
I hate it. But yeah, it definitely, I mean, no one knows what would have happened, but I would say
Mm,
on the trajectory, I would have probably ended up living with my grandparents or in foster care. It's a very easy assumption there would have been some suicide in the family. There's just a
mm,
lot of stuff that could have happened.
wow.
And a lot of stuff still did happen, but just very, very differently than I think the trajectory that we were
Sure.
on before.
Oh, that's amazing. So that was, I mean, like, this is early years. I always laugh because I always felt so bad as a Christian because I never really got many people saved. I don't think I
Yeah,
really ever got anyone saved. I think the best I
same.
can claim is when I was like a teenager, they asked me to do a talk at the youth outreach thing that they did every now and again. And I was bricking it, but I came up with this amazing talk. And it was basically just like, look, here's the deal, say the prayer, right? I mean, even if you don't mean it, it seems to me kind of foolproof. You say the prayer, you get in. Might as well say it. And like
Mhm.
14 kids raised their hands, and I was like, yes. But I don't think the youth pastor was excited by my speech as I was at the time. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
it worked. Why don't
Uh,
evangelism is easy. Uh,
Ding, ding, ding.
but
Jewels
but
on the crown. Right?
yeah, but here's you at 4 and you've got 2 under your belt, right? I mean, you're at 4-year-olds, you've saved 2 adults. I mean, this
Yeah.
is pretty good.
Might
Like,
be
you've
the
got
only
some
one.
feathers in the cap here at 4. That's pretty amazing. So did you continue to absolutely love church and be all about church then for quite a while?
Oh yeah. I, again, I think as a child, it's really easy to love it.
Mm,
You're with your friends, you're learning stories. I also ended up going to my church's school. They had a private school.
okay.
So for the years, as long as I was living in the States, I was a missionary kid, which I'm sure we'll get there. I went to school at the church's school. So a lot of the kids in my children's church class, Sunday school class, like we were all classmates
Mm,
too. And so it was really fun, like carrying it on, hanging out with my friends.
yeah.
The environment in my house was definitely much better than it was before,
Mhm.
and so I didn't have any complaints. And then you know we ended up being missionaries, and our church before I would say I was 7 when we moved to Russia, so I have an infant brother at this
Okay.
time. Um, my parents felt a call to be missionaries in Brazil early on, like shortly after we started going to church.
Wow.
We had our church sponsored a missionary in the Amazon who was on furlough and came and spoke, and my dad was like, "We're supposed to do that," and my mom was like, "I'm not living in poverty." That was her. That was her response.
That's funny. That is so funny. That's me to
But
a T when my dad, like, he was a pastor and we had nothing. We got like
mm,
he's not your mega church pastor pulling in like,
yeah.
200 grand a year. Like, we were living off nothing. If we went on welfare, we would have made more. That's actually
Mhm.
true, but he was like
Yeah.
committed to like being like, no, I'm gonna do it
No.
honorably or whatever. I don't know.
Mhm.
So like everyone, when they were asking me, like, are you going to be like your dad, a pastor? I was like, hell no, I want to be rich. Like, that was my
Yeah,
response. My thought of like, do
sure.
I want to be involved in ministry? I'm like, no, I didn't know Joel Osteen was a thing, or, whatever. I was like, no, everyone I know that's in ministry is dirt poor. I want to be like a rich businessman or something.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually, I still have issues around, like I want to be completely self-sufficient when it comes to me. I have a hard time
Mm,
asking for help, anything around money, because a lot of my life we were reliant on other
right.
people, supporting us, and I
Right.
hated it. And we moved to Brazil when I was 11, and I ended up starting my own business teaching English at
Mm,
11, and to Brazilians, because they had to learn a second language in high school,
sure.
like we do here in the States. And it was English or Spanish. Most of them wanted to learn English, but the city I lived in didn't have, like, their English teachers were Brazilians who learned from other Brazilians, and a lot of people wanted someone who had an American accent.
There you go. Yeah.
And so I was making like 35 reais per person per hour, which, at the
At
time,
11,
yeah, at
cash
11.
money,
Yeah,
money.
and my parents borrowed money from me all the
That's
time,
hilarious.
hit or miss if I got paid back. In fact, I actually got shamed a lot if I asked for money back. And
Yeah.
so I just, in my teens, I was like, I want to make money, and it's going to be
Mm,
my money.
yeah.
I'll give whatever away, but I'm not going to be beholden to anyone
Yeah.
else. They can't take it from me. And I've definitely worked through a good bit of that, but I still have a little bit
Yeah.
of a, like this is mine.
Yeah.
And
Did your giving away? I've never thought about this, but it just kind of like flicked a switch in my brain. But when you were making your money, did it influence how you gave your money, knowing how a lot of missionaries live, knowing what it is like to live in that lifestyle? Was that something you would think of when you were like, dang, I was that person's kid, I don't want them to have to struggle? Or did that ever, because that's never consciously crossed my mind, but when I think about how I gave as a Christian, I definitely was looking out for me as a kid and my dad as the pastor or the missionary or the evangelist or whatever, going,
mm,
that's something I really want. I don't really care about like tithing into the mega church or whatever, but
yeah,
I'm like, oh,
same.
you're a missionary, oh, you're
Hmm.
whatever, oh, you're like living hand to hand, like
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Even in it, like, even being a missionary kid and having money, I loved to treat the other missionary kids to, like, like, let's go get some ice cream and let's go shopping. And
Mm,
that's always been something I really enjoyed. But yeah, definitely after, even as an adult, someone really struggling, in ministry or not, definitely going to give something. And yeah, other missionary kids, pastors kids, even like if I was part of a church who supported missionaries and they came in on furlough, like, I'm taking their kids out, like, we're gonna go
right.
do some fun stuff. um did not want. And even for a while in Brazil, I'd say we were actually, there were times that we were poor and there were times that we were rich, because at one point I think the currency was like 4-to-1 American dollars.
Right.
So
Okay.
we suddenly have 4 times the money we
Yeah.
normally have. Um and Russia was a completely offset experience. We
Mm,
were there, just a few years after the fall of USSR, and it was very mafia run at
wow.
the time. And comparatively, we had a lot of money, and so we would like have our Russian friends or like our translators. We'd be like, hey, like, we buy them a can of Coke and a Snickers bar or something, and they're like, this whole thing is for me. And it was like, cost us $2. And they're like, oh, like, I'm gonna save this can of Coke so my mom can see what it looks like when you open it, because she's never seen this. And
Wow.
if I buy a Snickers bar, we're usually cutting it into 10 pieces for everyone to share. So just really, um, very different perspectives. And
Yeah, gosh.
but yeah, I definitely have a money thing still.
It messes
I,
with you though, doesn't it? I mean, it
mhm.
does. Like, yeah, it's statistically proven, those that grow up without and those that grow up with do have different outlooks on different things. They are more propensity to hoard. They're much less likely to, they're more likely to save, less likely to save, you know, all kinds of different components come into play that it does kind of just mess with your psyche, you know?
Yeah.
So many stories like orphans and stuff like that coming into a family with abundance, and they will never have to worry about food again, but, you know, taking a little, sneaking bits off the table and keeping them in their room in case, you know, they need extra food. And, you know, and I know, like, that's probably not either of our experience, even when we were struggling, like the families
Yeah.
have as much, but it messes with your head having that kind of like, my safety and security and comfort is based on someone called Barbara giving the church that sponsors us $20 this month, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever, you know, like,
Yeah. And them
if
keeping
that's
their,
enough,
yeah.
that could shift it all, right? You know, or
Right. Yeah. And them keep being able to keep up their livelihood in order to give, or still like
right,
what we're doing.
exactly.
You know, we have to be accountable, and different supporters had different vision of what that was, you know. So some
Right.
cared about how many souls you were winning, and others were a little more lax, and, you know, some cared about the image you were portraying in general.
Wow.
And
It's fascinating. Did you have to present, because obviously that's a thing, like, I know, like, growing up in church, we always got like the missionary, once in a year the missionaries would do their tour and come around and give us a talk or whatever, and but they'd also like send in like missions reports, you know, every few months you'd have like a
yeah,
little
a
thing with a picture of the
newsletter.
family and what's going on. And obviously to some degree there is an element of like, okay, we're gonna flesh this up, you know, like, you know, make it a bit look better, maybe, like, I'm not saying a lie or anything, but like, you know, like,
No, yeah,
all the
like,
good
yeah,
stuff, and maybe leave out the bit, you know, like,
the
didn't go so well,
yeah.
whatever. It's like the Christmas newsletter your gran sends, you know, it's only the good bits, right? It doesn't tell you that, you know, she, whatever, I don't know. Um, was there an element on you as a kid growing up as well, though, to have this kind of image? You're the missionary kid, you're representing Christ, you know, people are looking at you going, well, what is this Christian thing? Do I want to accept it? Brittany, you better like look
Mhm.
good, you know. Was that something
Yeah.
you had to deal with?
I don't think I felt it so much toward our supporters as I did just in, especially in Brazil, because I was there from 11 until I was almost 18. So,
Wow.
you know, very different. I was in a very different place in life than when we were in Russia, and it was a very different experience, you know, being in Brazil
Mhm.
versus Russia as well. But, you know, I'm white, so I'm gonna stick out. Everyone knows my name.
Mm.
Like, you know, we lived on the Amazon, but we lived in a city of like 360,000 people still. So, um, but there's like no one in that city who doesn't know my name, you know,
Wow.
whether or not they know me. They know, like, that's the white missionary girl who sings, and she has the weird name because, you know, Brittany doesn't exist in Brazil. So,
Mm.
um, and there was definitely a lot of pressure to be the poster child of Christianity as a, you know, as a pubescent young woman, and like, if you slipped up at all, everyone is gonna know.
Mhm.
And we also, the ministry where we were a part of was very, very big on accountability and discipleship. Like, you have your discipler and you meet with them weekly, and they go through this list of things. Did you tithe this week? Did you, you know, did you watch rated R movie? Did you have lustful thoughts about someone? Did you masturbate? And like, just a whole, it was like 20 questions, and every week you have to answer to this.
So funny. I always
And
wonder, like, how they come to this. Is there like a committee that comes up with the questions? Well, what about we ask about the R-rated movies, anyone? And everyone's kind of thinking, like, I did that, but that's a good point. Yes, get that on the
yes,
list. Yes,
get it on
never
the
ask
list.
me that, but good God. But it's funny, isn't it? Like, how they come up with this kind of, what, like, did you volunteer information? Well, actually, I didn't do any of those, but I did do this. Well, that's not on
Yeah.
the list, but we should probably add that to the
Yeah,
list.
we should add that. We should add this to the list. And
Oh,
so
that's an intense environment for
if
a
you
teenager, though.
if you answered incorrectly, incorrectly, then it was automatically brought to like your discipler superior. It was very business run, this
Wow.
whole thing, and then let's say, so like I was on the worship team. So if I messed up, then I would get removed from the worship team
Wow.
for a time while I repented and did whatever else I needed to do. And it would be told like, hey, Brit,
That's
had
so
lustful
funny.
thoughts against this person, and so she's not going to be singing for a while.
Everyone
uh,
gets up at worship time and it's like you're just sitting on the front row and they're like, well, guess
no?
she fucked up this week.
uh,
So funny.
which
It's just so,
thankfully,
as a teenager where you're just so living constantly paranoid as well, and what do people think of you? Oh
yeah.
God.
And certainly held to a higher standard as a pastor's kid and a missionary
Mm,
kid, and I think being white in general, which I think white people, we've done that to ourselves. We put ourselves on a pedestal,
yeah.
but I did, I didn't know that. I didn't ask for that. So yeah, it definitely breeded a culture of lying and shame. And because
Mm,
why are you gonna tell somebody that you slipped up if it's gonna cause all of this chaos in your life? So,
yeah.
so I definitely felt like I had to be on point, and I wasn't a particularly bad child either. I was fairly obedient and I definitely had my things. Was pretty good at keeping them secret, but I wasn't someone who was just gonna go and do everything that people looked down upon. But
Mm,
it was some, modesty was a big deal. The Brazilian culture in general does not adhere to nearly the same, uh, American Christian standard of modesty. And
right.
I remember I had these, my clothes were all hand-me-downs, like whatever people sent me, whatever other missionary kids had before me. And I had this pair of shorts that was like down to my knees, but it was like, it cut off really weird in the middle of my knees. So I rolled it up twice. And so it was still to my knee. But like the president of the mission we worked with went to my mom and was like, I think you need to have a chat with Brit, because
She's
we
showing a
don't
bit of
want her to
knee
have
here.
that Jezebel spirit.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. That's intense. So, I'm quite intrigued by that. I'm intrigued by a whole bunch of different things there's so many different directions. But one of the things that, I mean, this is blown up on my page so much more, probably since about 2 years, year and a half ago, I started following No White Saviors. And
Yeah.
from there, went on this whole journey of like kind of trying to address my racism, my implicit racism, a whole bunch of different stuff that's there that I don't know that's there, the systemic, how does that shape me, all that stuff. And through that, meeting amazing people. Jo Lumen is probably one of my favorite people because of her focus on it within my tradition of
Yeah.
Christianity and decolonizing that. I know that you've kind of tracked to some of that stuff as well. At least recently, I've seen you
Mhm.
engage with some of that stuff. How do you look back on that time from that perspective of now being a bit more aware of just how much of a, like, the white savior complex, that kind of white supremacy that is intermingled, as well meaning, the
Yeah.
intention is there. um, Generally speaking, 9 out of 10 people have, probably way higher than 9 out of 10 people have no malcontent or desire, but the impact is negative a lot of the
Yeah.
time. Looking back, how have you kind of perceived that and processed that and reinterpreted kind of your time there? Because I'm sure at the time, young girl brought up in this environment, brought up by missionaries, brought up, you're
We're
probably
doing the
not,
Lord's work.
you're probably not literally, like reading anti-racism literature, not working through, the crossing the lynching post, or that's probably not the work you're doing at 14. You're
Yeah.
busy making cash. um, how has that affected you? I know we're jumping like way into the future to
Oh, it's good.
readdress this time, but I'm intrigued by this.
Yeah. So I'm definitely still processing it. But I do have I do have some thoughts and opinions. Certainly, I don't think any of us as kids even thought twice about, like, we we thought we were Brazilians, you know, like, I mean, we knew we were American, especially those of us. There were a few of us who were actually born in Brazil. But, you know, like we knew we were Americans, but like at heart we were Brazilian,
Yeah.
and, you
Because you
know, there
moved,
wasn't,
what age did you move to Brazil?
I was 11.
Yeah,
Yeah.
such a young age, isn't it? So yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And, you know, so I don't, you know, serving God is the right thing. Uh, and so bringing everyone else to God, like that, like that's what we're doing. We're out here doing the hard work, and you know, and I don't know I don't know how much we'll say about like this ministry in particular while I'm here, but I have a lot of negative things to say about it. But there's a lot of really cool things that we did too. You know, we built our own boats, and they had different purposes, and we went out to river villages, and we dug wells, and we gave people clean water, and we built schools, and we had doctors come from the States and Canada and southern Brazil, and we go out, and you know, places who were days and days of boat ride away from a hospital, and you know, we save some lives, we help people get healthy. So a lot of really, really cool things that we've done. I don't think anyone, I couldn't even say that any of the actual missionaries that we worked with had any sort of like malice or ill intent in their hearts towards towards the community. But there were definitely, outside of, you know, my feelings of proselytizing and whatnot, and we can talk about colonization or whatever, outside of those feelings, one of the like little things that we did that I didn't even notice as a thing, but now I look at it and I'm like, wow, how elitist were we? Like how bad is this? So there were a lot of American missionaries in this particular city, Santarém, Brazil. And this ministry was in multiple areas of Brazil at the time, and now is like in Japan and Italy, and even I think they have a church here in Chicago. So it's, you know, it's really, it's blown up even more, but they were in all sorts of places. But this particular city, which like the flagship of the mission, they had a compound of sorts. So there was one street, owned most of the houses on the street, and then there was one like gated area that had several apartments in it, and a big courtyard that we, you know, had a basketball goal and a soccer field and a big gazebo where we'd have like all of our holiday stuff and prayer meetings and whatnot. And all of the Americans lived on that street or in that compound, and it was called Gringo Land. And you know, like you didn't have to know your address if you need someone to take you home. You just you're like, oh, I live in Gringolândia, and everyone knew where it was.
Right. They probably didn't even really have to ask where you lived, right? They're like,
right.
Gringo, got it.
Yeah. So and it was really great for the missionaries, and I say there's still, again, not taking into account colonization or whatever, like there's still an argument to be made for that. It's very hard to be a missionary. It's very hard to be away from your family and friends and live in an area that you don't know, with a language that you don't know, which are maybe all arguments and reasons to not go, but but assuming you think you're doing the right thing,
if you could power through that without seeing any issues,
it's really nice to have that community close by,
right? I bet.
But when I think about it from other perspective, I'm like, man, how must it have felt to just, you know, there's this whole like subdivision essentially of white people, and they, you know, they might invite you into their home, but you're not invited to all of their parties, and you're not in the day to day, and is just very different. And I would actually like to someday, there are two people in particular who Brazilians who grew up like with us and pretty much in it. Their families were either very close to a missionary family, or there's one who his mom was the maid for one of the families, and she worked for them for like 15 years or whatever. So he grew up with us like as one of us, but then not as one of us, right? Like we're all homeschooled, and we see each other during the day, and he has to go to school. And then when we have, you know, our Christmas parties or whatever, the Brazilians are not invited. And so it's like,
Yeah.
More in than your average person, but still an outsider. And even to the point where it's like, oh, you're going to fall in love with one of us. Like, there's no way, no way you're going to marry any of us, so there, I would be interested to know from their perspective now, how it was being like insider outsider, because I can't imagine, I imagine it has to have affected them in some ways that I don't know. But yeah, so things like that, like not getting into the broader thing. I'm very, I don't want to say I'm anti-missionary now, but I'm close. Like, not like, screw you for being a missionary, but
yeah. You're not like running into missionary, like,
like you're doing terrible things.
But you're close.
Yeah, I'm close. I would like to think that there are some ways to do some sort of missions appropriately, but honestly, I don't know if that's true. The more and more I think about it, the less and less I think it is, which is strange too, because I actually thought for a long time that I would create something for missionaries. I wanted to, I saw so much, which, my family went through a lot, and mental health was extremely taboo thing in evangelicalism. It's still not great, but it was very, very mostly just skirted over, right? We don't and I saw a lot of it in my own family, and I saw other families going through similar things, and missionaries coming back to States or to wherever their home countries were, and falling into a major depression because nobody knows what you've just gone through.
No.
And I even would see it for people who go on like a 10-day mission trip, right? You're on this high, and you're helping people, and maybe you're seeing some kind of miracle, or and you come home and everyone else has lived their lives these last 2 weeks, and was like, oh, hey, great story, but nobody else is impacted. Like, nobody understands what you've gone through, and nobody understands what you're going through trying to come back to your reality. And I really wanted to create a retreat for missionaries to come. I wanted to be able to support it, and with all of my money, I wanted to be able to absolutely support it, where they could just come and chill and be relaxed and not have to do anything. We want the ATVs, I want the boats, I want everything. Come and have fun. We'll cook for, all of your meals are taken care of. We'll have some counselors on site who understand, who have been in that world, who know, and they can even help coach you, like when you're on the fields. And I also wanted to bring in people to teach like how, like, maybe other ways to be sustainable in the country you're living in, rather than simply relying on support from other people. And I had this whole dream, and now I'm, fuck missionary adjacent. So, so I don't know.
You can set the same thing up, but it's like a deprogramming center. Sneak attack.
You don't need to be a missionary. Yeah.
That's funny.
But I see, and even looking at like what was created there, some very cool things happened. But we also, there's still, it's bad. I don't know. The mission that we were a part of as well was family run, and as with many family run things, there's this real culture of control and manipulation. And I mean, that was obvious in the whole like discipleship thing too. And they wanted, control over their missionaries to a great extent, which is ultimately how we ended up leaving that mission. But it's so ingrained in the people of the church as well. And one thing I will say that starts off positively and ends negatively. When we first moved to that city in general, there was no middle class. You were like very poor. or you were very rich. And people coming to the church actually ended up creating a middle class of sorts. People were happier. They were, they were chucking the alcohol and going to work and trying to be good stewards. And not that any of this completely solves the problem. It actually hits a lot of stereotypes that I don't love, but it did cause a lot of people to join the workforce and want to do well and get promotions. And, suddenly there are all these cars on the street that didn't exist before. Your average Joe median is much higher than it was before. But it has become, like, I don't know, they've become a little bit famous, and in such have created working situations that are amazing if you're an upper level pastor, and then terrible if you are, some other worker in the church or ministry, and is just kind of flip-flopping that whole thing. And the church is actually creating the divide of the wealthy and the poor, rather than
right, trying to
creating a situation that doesn't do that. So.
Wow. Yeah. So you were there till 18. I'm assuming that means that you left to do university, college, something like that. Is that kind of the transition?
It was the plan. We actually, when I was 16, we moved to Rio de Janeiro. That's when we left the mission. And there was a church plant already there with a pastor we had met before, but he had ties to a church, a mega church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, we were familiar with because we're from that area. And so we went to help them out. So we're there for about a year, and shortly before my 18th birthday, I actually decided at that point that I wanted to go to university in Rio.
Wow.
At that point, I had no intention of leaving Brazil. I loved Rio. I loved where we lived before too. Though it was a journey to get there. Thought I would hate Rio because I'd finally grown to love where I was living, and now we're being ripped from it. I was very, very upset about it, but ended up loving it. They have great schools in Rio. I was homeschooled through all of high school, self-taught really, which is also its own story. But I finished all of my work at 15. And I think we had a conversation about this recently. I wanted to come back to the States. I was going to go to Louisiana State University. That was kind of my plan. And my parents were like, no, you're too young. And then they told me that I could come a year early if I went to ministry school. And I was like, right. No, I don't want to do that. But we're in Rio. I'm like, I want to go to school here. They would not accept my homeschool diploma. And so I did an accelerated kindergarten through high school in Portuguese, 9-month program. Wow. I did it all. I actually did all the work. But the graduation ceremony or whatever was shortly after we came back to the States. And
oh man.
And it was a quick thing. My mom was having a very hard time. She was going to leave us. And so it wasn't like a plan. Wow. It wasn't a planned situation. And so I didn't get that. But yeah, that had been my plan. So we ended up coming back to the US shortly before my 18th birthday. I was very, very upset. And I was like, I'm almost 18. Can I just stay? And my dad was very much like, no, you have to be there for your mom. You have to come with us. And he was like, in 6 months, if you still want to come back to Brazil, then we'll let you. But they didn't. I mean, at that point, I was technically an adult and I could have, but so remember all the money that I was making through my preteen and teen years. I actually had in my head, like, I'm saving for college. Like, I was trying to put money away, and my parents were like, no, we actually have a college fund for you. Like, go and be a kid and have fun with your money. And then we came back to the States, and my mom wanted to build her dream house, and they took my college fund and built a house. So, nice. So yeah, and then at that point I was just like, well, I don't know what's good anymore, and I don't know what I want to do, and I didn't want to go to college to just go to college. So
Right.
so I ended up being like, I had Harvard dreams originally, but the way that I was homeschooled, it wasn't in link with anything, and I didn't know about
Mm.
all of the extra things that I had to do for an Ivy League. So anyway, um I would have been the last person, though, that anyone knowing me growing up would have thought would not go to university. I did
Wow.
eventually get a bachelor's in business administration online, but I didn't go. I didn't go to college. But yeah, so I was in
Wow.
Louisiana for a couple of years. Ended up moving to Arizona for a really cool job. Worked in behavioral health, mostly with Indigenous Americans
Wow.
for almost a decade, uh, and now I'm in Nashville. If that,
Wow.
uh, you know, just
Yeah.
here.
So in the jumping around, do you come back from Brazil and go straight back into kind of that similar kind of world of Christianity? Like there was no kind of um, disconnect in that process, because sometimes it's in a major upheaval that you reevaluate these things or things like that. But how did you kind of handle that with your faith?
I I didn't ever take anything out on, like, to me, until the last like year or so. There was never a question about, is God real? For like 10 years before now, I have been deconstructing a lot of beliefs, but one thing I was so sure I was going to hold on to was, God is God and God is good.
Mm.
And so it didn't impact my faith in the sense of like what I believed, but I will say that my biggest culture shock coming back to the States was the church, which I didn't expect. I would have thought
Mm.
going into the workforce, like
Right.
suddenly not being around Christians all the time was going to be, and there was definitely some things that led to some very some very embarrassing things. Like I worked at a Sonic. I don't know if you've had the pleasure, if it is, of eating at a Sonic drive-in when you've been here in the United States, but it's an
I have
open
been. I've
drive-in
had
diner.
food from a Sonic. Yeah.
Okay, so I actually managed one for
Oh
several years,
wow.
but I went to work
Is Sonic the
uh,
one that's got like multiple like
stalls.
stalls that you
Yeah.
drive through?
Hmm.
God, that blew my mind. There's
Yeah.
things that when you're from Europe, you get to America and like you consistently are amazed by the things that can become drive-throughs, right? So you go, oh wow, banks. You guys just don't park and go into the bank. You just do the drive-through thing. I
Yep.
guess it's kind of a little bit low-key lazy, but I like it. Okay, cool. And then you just kind of expect, oh, drive-through ammunition. That feels like less of a good idea, but okay, cool. And like it's different, so you consistently kind of come into terms with different drive, because we basically have drive-through fast food, and even then only in kind of like bigger cities. In a smaller rural area, you get out your car and you go walk,
Yeah.
you get it. um but then it's things like when I went to like something like a Sonic, I'm like,
Yep.
really, you couldn't just do one? That wasn't, you were like, let's just do loads of these. We're anticipating 8 people coming at once and we want to serve them all immediately at the same like it was next level. Did I lose you? Are you there? Oh, you're back. You froze for a second.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Oh,
love I
I'm
love the
okay.
American European differences that what you just don't know exist until you get there,
Difference.
and you're like,
Yeah.
whoa, drive-through liquor store,
Wow. Yeah.
definitely not good idea, right? I think that was in Texas. I saw that one. I was like, this just doesn't feel like at any point
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Drive
nobody
through. Like,
thought this through.
yeah. Have you in Louisiana, we have drive-through daiquiri shops. So you actually go and get like a cup of alcohol, and it's not an open container if you don't stick the straw in there. So
Right.
there's like, people are like taking the lid off and drinking and driving, and it's not an open container.
It's fascinating to me, really. So it's fascinating to me because in Scotland, where I'm from, we have a zero tolerance policy. So if you have any alcohol in your system, that's it. You lose your
Yeah.
license. You're done. It's just
Yeah.
there's no
Oh, you
tolerance.
just
You
lose
don't
your
have, and you're
wow.
done. Like yeah, say like done. No
Wow.
license. Whatever the term is, 3 years, 5 years. I don't know what it'll be.
Yeah.
If you have enough, I mean, and it's enough is a small amount. You're talking jail time. Like I mean, we don't tolerate drinking without.
Yeah.
there's just no concept of like, why would you put at risk people's
Mhm.
lives for the sake of having a drink? Get a taxi, or whatever, walk,
Yep.
right? But that is something that's fascinating me in America, is how common, even in the church, where I'm like, well, there's a whole other level of like ethical, moral implication. You think you're at least more moral being in the church, but
Yep.
like, I'm like, the amount of people I would hang out with when I was in America for 4 years, and then even when I travel and stuff, that like drink a decent amount, not just like, a pint of beer or
Mhm.
whatever, and then just get in the car and drive home. And they're like, you want to lift? And I'm like, not from you, no. Like, if you want me to drive for you, because that was 3 whiskeys, like it's a little over.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's just a different cultures again, but
Yeah, very
it's
different.
terrifying sometimes. That one is terrifying for me, the drink driving kind of component. But again, it's all contextual, right? It's in your own bubble. Different people have a different idea. But yeah,
Mhm.
drive through daiquiri, that's an idea.
Yeah.
I
Gotta
would
go to
just be considered, if
America.
I started up a drive through daiquiri, I'm sitting with lawyers for a long time before that idea gets. I'm like, guys, okay, I know we're not technically facilitating any drink driving, but is there any chance at some point a lawsuit hits us? Because I feel like there's gonna be some people that get hit by cars, and there's gonna be a spilt daiquiri on the floor of the
Right.
car. The police are gonna find that
Phil's
and think,
daiquiris, we're going after Phil. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I'm just too forward thinking for that stuff. I'm covering it with the lawyers like hard before I
Yeah.
open that business.
Yep.
But yeah, anyway.
But
Sorry,
yeah,
total
yeah,
budding
no, it's
workshop.
good. Sonic was like my first American workforce
Wow.
experience, and I honestly, was like the good girl or whatever. Everyone knew I was a Christian, but it didn't. There were words I wasn't used to hearing on a regular basis that kind of threw me,
Yeah.
but it was just I felt very accepted. It was in church that things were so different,
It's interesting.
um and
So in what
I
ways were they so different, did you think?
yeah.
How did you perceive them
So I
different?
mean, and again, I did come from a ministry that was like had very very strict rules on. I mean, dating was not a thing. You it was this whole like courtship. It's called the royal romance, and it had to be approved by your disciplers, and like everything was very very controlled. And I didn't. I mean, I had to. I had to agree essentially with it because I was in it. But it
Mm,
wasn't like a lot of it just seemed like a very far stretch to me, even at the time. I didn't have so many things seemed so wrong growing up, but I didn't have the experience or the vocabulary or the emotional intelligence to be able to put them
mm,
to words, which I think is part of what made deconstruction a little bit easier whenever I got there. It was like, okay, so all these things that I thought were bad, they were abuse. uh, anyway, I get to like the youth group, and these are people that this is the church that I was in the early years, and the in between Russia and Brazil. We were there for 4 years. Like, I've known a lot of these people my entire life, or almost my entire life, and there was just such a disconnect, and everyone was dating everyone in the youth group, like not at once, but it was like I'd be dating you for 2 weeks, and then suddenly you're dating my best friend, and I'm just like, this this
right.
is
This is not a royal
like,
romance.
right, but right, and also we're hanging out like it's no big deal, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. And
Wow.
everything was such a production, which is very different. Not that we um there were things that we did that were a production in Brazil, but it just seemed like everything was like some gimmick for to get the kids in. And then the way that my parents were treated, the way that we ended up leaving the mission field, right? The church didn't know how to how to address that, or be supportive at all. So they just kind
Right.
of wrote us off. Nobody, didn't really talk to us. There was no explanation for why we were back.
Wow.
And I think someone recommended that my mom go to a Christian counselor, which I'm very triggered by that term now. But she went to one session, and the counselor told her, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. you just needed to vent, which it was just like, it's sad on so many levels. I'm no psychiatrist, so I'm not trying to diagnose my mom, but I do know a lot about mental health, and I worked in the field for a long time. I've got loads of trauma of my own that I'm working through, and I have some ideas of it, but also like everyone can benefit from therapy, I think. And
Absolutely,
so
right?
to just be
Absolutely.
like, oh, like one session and you've just unloaded, your entire life in one session, not to
Right.
mention the, 10 years on the mission field, or it just
And that to a therapist doesn't make me think, oh, I need to go deeper into this. It makes me think,
right.
okay, so you're done now. Good.
Yeah,
We did
exactly.
really
Like
well. We got through
like
30 years in one go.
yeah, she came home and she was like, there's nothing, I'm good, there's nothing wrong with me. Not that, not that I want to be like, there's something wrong with my mom, but in like a negative way. But anyway, it was very, and I didn't even know how I felt. Therapy was kind of this like off concept, like, you see it on sitcoms where like rich American high school girls go to therapy because their parents are absent, they're always in Europe, and
Yeah.
but I was still like, I that just doesn't seem right. So
Mm.
uh anyway, the way that we were treated, and then just dynamics in the youth group. The youth pastor also just had, and again didn't have the knowledge or vocabulary to put it there, but it like definitely some narcissistic tendencies, and I wanted to get involved right away. Like that was my, like, church has been my life, and I
Mm.
love it, and I want to, like, how can I get involved? And he was like, okay, like, we're so happy to have no one else here has had the experiences that you've had, and you're going to bring a new perspective to what we're doing, and we're so excited, and your skills and your talents, and your skills and your talents, and your skills and your talents. But in order to be a leader here, we're going to need you to not listen to any secular music, and can't watch rated R films, and then you have to promise that you're not going to go move anywhere for a really, really long time. And
Hey.
like, what? Like, at this time, because I actually grew up not being, remember we burned all of our cassettes
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and records
First
or
couple
whatever.
on the list, you're like, okay, yeah, I've done this
Right.
before.
Yeah. I don't think I started listening to non-Christian music until I was like 15. Then I
Wow.
like my dad let me listen to some oldies, and then it just kind of grew from there. But I'm like, I just finally got to a place in my life where I can listen to non-Christian music. Well, yeah, I want to be involved, so I'll give it up. And I'm like, finally got to a place in my life where I'm allowed to watch rated R movies. But yeah, but then I was like, promise
That's
you're going to
funny.
be here for a long time. And I'm like, I haven't lived anywhere
Yeah.
consecutively for more than 7 years, and not even in the same house in that instance. So I was just like, I don't why.
Mm.
And he had, he had this whole thing where just like several of his leaders had gotten married to people from other churches or other places, or wanted to go to Hillsong School of Ministry, and like left him, and he felt like everyone was leaving, and so he was just trying to like grasp onto everyone and make them commit to even ask
Wow.
for a lifetime commitment. And I'm like, I'm 17. I can't. I'm actually really proud of myself now talking about this, that I had the wherewithal to say,
Yeah,
like, I'm
absolutely.
17. I can't
Yeah.
promise you that I'm going to be here. So
What an
I wasn't
unreasonable
allowed to
request for any
be a
human
leader.
being. But at that age as well, like at that age,
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's the age where people start to go, okay, maybe,
Yeah.
but like, what kind of weird, it kind of exposes some really weird theology that people have underlying that, it's like, oh, what a waste of time that I equipped this person to become a leader, and then they went and became a leader at a different church, or used that gift somewhere else, or went to get further training. Like, that was a waste, or that was like a betrayal. And it's like, well, this kind of betrays some sort of greater, grander, cosmic kind of purpose that you clearly don't believe in on some
Yeah.
level. Because if
And
you
yeah, and
did,
it was
this would
also
be a good thing.
strange. Yeah, and for a church who like cared so much about missions, like we supported so many missionaries,
Mm.
we sent out so many missionaries, and so to be like, oh, you have to stay here in this in the small town, indefinitely to serve in this ministry. It was very strange. And so I couldn't be a leader because I wouldn't give that commitment. And so I went and like filled a seat at the youth group for several months, just like hoping that they would see like I'm here and I'm faithful and maybe they'll change their mind. And I did the manual labor that I was allowed to, of setting up and tearing down chairs.
There you go. Yeah.
But every single time I went up for prayer, this youth pastor had a prophetic word for me, and it was all about how I was never supposed to leave. Like, this is going to be my home forever. And I was God. Nothing about this is genuine. And
that's so wild.
And so I eventually
so at least you you saw that though, right? You were like, this is not genuine. You weren't like enamored, because I've known at that age, God, I probably would have been like enamored by this person. It's a leader I really would look up to. I want someone in that position to kind of like think I'm the bee's knees. And if I at that age had a youth pastor that said, you need to be here for the next 5 years and I'm going to train you to be the greatest, you'll have my job when I move on and become the senior pastor, whatever the next step is, associate pastor, like I would have grabbed that. I think I was really quite desperate for, so on some levels, I don't know, it's really hard for me to conceptualize what I would have done, but like you didn't have that response. You were kind of like, no, that's messed up. That's not true.
That's messed up.
That's really interesting.
And I stayed around for a few months, like I said, like just trying to show like I'm here, but I'm not gonna get, like I can't promise you forever. And eventually it just, at this point I am 18, I have a job, I'm making money, I'm I have freedom, I'm gonna have a car, and it just like I eventually stopped going. I would go on Sundays, but I have always been so involved in church that going just to sit and listen, to a sermon and say hello to people and goodbye to people, it's just never been my my cup of tea. And anytime I have been part of a ministry and have eventually been so vocal about something that they didn't like and been reduced to a like, well, we're not gonna, I don't have a story where someone was like, leave quietly and leave immediately, but it's just been like, we would love to have your skills behind the scenes. You can do some manual labor for us and, volunteer 40 hours a week behind the scenes. But when it's Sunday or whatever other church service day, you're in the seat and you are silent.
Wow. That's so fascinating.
And so I have through all of that, I'm 18. I quit going. I go on Sundays occasionally. I actually sometimes, when I became a manager at a Sonic, I often would schedule myself to work during church times just so that I had that excuse to give my mom. But I wouldn't say that I did it myself. But it's just like, oh, I can't go to church, I have to work. And then. And this has been kind of consistent and through my adult life, right? I'll start to miss it. I'll start to miss church. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I could say community, but the truth is I've always, anytime that I have been in a place where my church community has always proven to be not a real community. If anything, if I differed in anything, I always found the people in it that ended up like carrying on to be true community. But I've always just like, I built my own table, like I feel like I don't fit in. I'll build my own table. The right people show up at it. So it's not like I've ever truly missed community, but I think it's just the involvement, which now makes me want to vomit. Cause there's a coffee shop. Yeah, I'm in the buckle of the Bible Belt here in Nashville, and there's a coffee shop that I like to work out of sometimes. And almost everyone in this town is a Christian. I swear, not in Nashville proper, but like the outskirt towns. So the town this coffee shop is in, like it's probably 99.9% believers. And I'll
That's
be
funny.
sitting in there and just, there's a Bible study over here and there's a pastor planning a sermon over here. And I just like to listen. I actually I have an Instagram handle called like Coffee Shop Eavesdrops or something that I was going to like start
Yes.
posting stuff, but I never did.
That's so funny.
But I'll just hear people on the phone and like someone will call and they're like, oh yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen you. And you can like imagine the conversation on the other end, right? Like, yeah, we absolutely need to hang out. Yeah, I would love to. Oh no, I can't on Thursday because I have small group. And oh no, I can't do that day because I have worship practice. And like, no, I have to be at 3 services on Sunday. And
Wow.
and I'm just like, how was I this person? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
just
That's
like
so funny.
no time for anyone else. But I think there was just something I liked about being involved, and I think it was
Mm.
the idea that I was doing something good for other people. And so I always end up back, and then I'm enamored at the beginning, and then I learn something new about God, and then I find out all the terrible things about myself and I try to fix them. And then it's like, oh, and then all of a sudden, like once I get past, once I work through my own stuff enough, then I'm looking and I'm like, we're not really helping our community here, like these people are hurting over here.
Mm.
Let's go, let's go do something. Or like, hey, this person showed up at our church and nobody wanted him here because he was gay, and like, what are we going to do about that? Uh and then it just ends up being a whole, and then I start to feel unreasonable as I, the more and more I get quieted, and then I have to, it's like, oh hey, you're you're hurting this person. Like, you keep talking down to them.
Mm.
This is abusive, which I feel like abuse just seems to be like such a big word, and it is a heavy word for sure. But it's like, as soon as you call something in the church abuse, you are like a harlot.
Mm.
Because it's like, no, it's like all of a sudden, we're all sinners and we're all saved by grace, and
Mm.
no one will use the word abuse. And if you do, you're just like, you're too harsh. And I think
Yeah.
a great step that we could take to healing what's happening in churches all over the world, and just, I feel like the church in general, especially the American church, is if we could at least say like, hey, this was abusive.
Yeah.
And then, hopefully that would come with an I'm sorry, and these are the steps I'm taking to work,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
But
fix
there's
it.
all those
But
steps required. But I mean, when you're not even at the first, like, I mean, the amount of people that will be like, well, you can't speak poorly of Christ's bride, or,
yeah,
this is the body of Christ that you're speaking poor. I got that so much when I would just
sure.
post some funny memes or something. And I'm like,
Mm,
dude, have you ever laughed at yourself? It's okay. Like,
yeah,
like, but people are like, no, it's criticism of the body. You can't joke about the body, like, and so a whole nother level when you look at stuff like Do Better Church and some of these
yeah,
movements that are coming to the surface that are going, so like a whole bunch of people got raped and like abused and silenced and stuff. Can we talk about that? And it's like, no, we're
no,
sending you a cease and desist. And how dare you? Like, honestly, how dare you speak so
yeah.
negatively about the body of Christ? And it's like, but
Oh,
you've not even acknowledged the people who got raped.
right.
You know that part
Yeah,
happened, right? And
right,
it's like, no, no,
right.
no. The issue on the table is that you mentioned the people
You,
getting raped.
yeah,
That's our issue. We need you to deal with that. No, 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 I don't think I need to deal with the fact that I mentioned you rape people. I think the thing is, maybe you could mention the fact that you raped someone. Deal
yeah.
with it, question it, like, apologize, make amends, start to make some sort of process. But it's impossible until we can bring down that defensive barrier that says receiving criticism does not negate every good thing you can do. It does not negate who you are. Like,
Hmm.
we all screw up, right? It's okay for
Yeah,
you to go, oh, I was a terrible husband today. I was in a foul mood. I'm really, really sorry. And that doesn't mean that I've been a terrible husband my whole life. It doesn't mean that I'm worthless. It doesn't mean that my wife hates me. but it probably has gone a long way to making tomorrow a better day for my wife, if I can admit that.
Yeah,
And then
admit it.
in
Yeah.
admitting it, I maybe look at myself and go, so why was I such a terrible husband? Oh yeah, because I didn't eat enough and I got really grumpy or whatever, right?
Mhm.
It's like, that's, why can we not do that, right? What is it in us that's so defensive? Yeah,
I, I don't know. I love, you know, I'm not a spokesperson for Do Better Church by any means, but I man the Twitter or woman the Twitter over here. And, you know, I help create some of the slides, and some of the stories are mine. None of my stories have been posted yet, but I'm definitely contributing. But I look at this and I've gotten so many DMs, like, why do you hate the church? Why do you, you know, like, why do you hate all of the people you've ever been in ministry with? And I'm like,
right.
I don't hate anyone. I'm like, in fact, that's why it's been so hard to talk about this stuff, because
Yeah.
I don't want anyone to feel like I hate them. But like, and the stories that were coming in, that is what led to the creation of Do Better Church, definitely helped me of like, okay, because I could easily like, oh, it's just, even though I'm like, oh, I've been part of like 27 ministries and I've seen this in all of them, and I've, you know, I've talked to hundreds of people who have seen the same thing in their circles, you know. But at this point it's like, okay, these are people I don't know, with story, you know, with stories in churches that I don't know, and all over the US and all over the world, and I've had nothing to do with these ministries, and the same kind of things are happening. Like, that's a problem. Like, it, like, I mean, it was a problem before, but like, and so, and Joe Lumen is an amazing person. I'm happy to have the access to her that I do. And just the way that she unapologetically will speak out to people is good. It's like, yes, I've tried to do this, but I only get so far, and then I feel unreasonable, and I'll ask her, you know, like, I'll see her, like, when John Chris comeback video came out, and
Oh my
I saw
gosh.
her in the DMs, and I'm like, she's saying all of the things that I want to say, and I'm just like, thank you for doing this. I feel so unreasonable. And she's like, I feel that sometimes too, but then I remember, like, so many people feel that, and I'm the one who's strong, you know, like, we're the ones who are strong enough right now to be able to say something,
Yeah.
because we're not in that anymore, and we've worked through enough of it that we can be vocal. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right.
Yes.
um so yeah, it just, and every time she posts something, I actually texted her yesterday, I think it was yesterday, and I was like, can you adopt me? Because I was like, I think we're like close to the same age, but but
Yeah.
like, I just want you to be my mom.
That's so funny. She is honestly
um
the best. I love her to bits. So,
yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, seeing the stories and Do Better Church, and that's, I mean, I'm actually like, I want to do a series of stories on my own Instagram to show it. I don't know. I don't know that I owe anybody any reason for being absent for several days at a time, but I'm like, it's so easy to look at at any content that I create or share and be like, oh, she's so offended and she's so hateful, and like, doesn't care about anything. It is like, it, you know, aside from all of the shit that I'm working through on my own right now, like, I I'm talking to these people behind the scenes, and we're having conversations in your Discord, right? And like,
Mhm.
things that are heartbreaking and victorious and wonderful, but but taxing, you know, emotionally taxing. And
Really
then I'm
taxing.
typing up these Do Better Church stories behind the scenes, and I'm just crying, and you know, and then, and I see another you know, Christian figure commit terrible acts and then be put right back in the same position, and like, all of that, like, comes up for me again, and just like, you know, that's the stuff that you don't see. um
Yeah.
and so you know, I don't know, I'm trying to navigate this whole, like, have it out there on the gram thing, because I've never been someone, well, I've always been a vocal and fiercely protective person. I've not been someone who puts a lot of the stuff out there, and I really feel
Mhm.
like I'm supposed to be. Otherwise I would not do it.
You've got to be a certain
uh,
type of person to want to do this, without being like, you know, having this drive that says I
yeah,
was put on this earth to do this. Because God, damn, is it not, generally speaking, the most rewarding thing? Not because people aren't very encouraged by it, or because people don't tell you they're encouraged by it, but because we don't listen to any of that, and we listen to all the hate mail. So it just is very
Yeah.
tiring. It's really, really tiring. And then when you're working with
Yeah.
stuff like abuse and deconstruction, things like that, like you're listening to people's stories, and generally speaking, they're absolutely awful, terrible, heartbreaking stories. It's really tiring going through that and engaging with that. And I don't think many people realize the toll it can take.
Yeah.
It's
And
amazing
they
work.
also don't see, they also don't see that that you are talking to people 5 and 6 hours a day, or, they don't
Nobody
see the
sees the behind the
consequences.
scenes.
Yeah.
Nobody sees. So.
So, uh,
Yeah.
I, yeah. So, and, I don't even have that many followers, right? I have I think I have like 480 something followers, and, but it's
We'll
definitely
change
going
this
up
after that podcast.
as I'm,
It's gonna jump.
yeah.
We'll get everyone. I'll plug it big.
Well, and I'm sitting here like, do I want more? I do.
Well, I'll
Like,
just give him a false link if you don't.
yeah. I do, in the sense that I want to help whoever is
Yeah.
willing to be helped, and I want to, people like you, and I'm trying to think of who else I follow now in this realm, but Joe is fairly new to me,
Mhm.
just the last like 6 months or so.
Yeah.
Even No White Saviors, which isn't even like a Christian particular thing. I followed them for the last couple of years. Just
Mm.
the learning that Derek Webb, just learning, knowing that I've not been alone in this whole thing, and getting different perspectives, and from people
Yeah.
um, who are, who have landed, and landed being not a finite term, right? Because I think most of us who've deconstructed, we know like our set of beliefs now, like when presented with new information, we're absolutely open to there being change again.
Yeah.
So, but people who, who currently identify as atheist or agnostic or Christian, or who stayed a Christian the whole time, or who left and came back, and mystics, and just having all of that, being able to see um, a wide variety of the way people are living their lives,
Yeah.
but each of us having gone through a very similar process. I'm like, if anything that I've gone through or am going through is helpful to just one other, if it helps one other person feel not alone
Mm.
in this world, then I'm doing something worth doing.
Absolutely.
And that's ultimately what I care about. Hate mail, hate messages, or whatever, as much as I don't want them to affect me, and that's not my focus. I have to remember that it's gonna affect me at some point. And it's gonna,
Yeah.
if my platform gets bigger, I know that I'll see it more. But it's the other messages that, the people who want to talk for 4 or 5 and 6 hours a day, that I'll do it for. So
It's really, really valuable and important work. So yeah, no, thank you for doing it. I've been loving your Instagram stories. I'm fascinated. So you're talking, if it helps anyone, it helps me, because you've been doing a series working through my posts.
yeah.
So I did the Deconstruction Myths series that I probably still need to do many more. I'm sure I could think of more, but you've been posting them, and then like just, fleshing them out and talking about what you think about it, how it's, how you've perceived that myth, experienced that myth, what you think about that, why you think it's not fair. And I'm like, whoa, this is really good stuff. Like, this is really helpful. It's helping me see new nuances and angles to it. And so I think it's really, really, really valuable stuff you're doing. You're putting it in fresh, unique ways. If you're helping me get more out of my own stuff, I have no doubt that you're helping many other people that haven't even begun to think about some of these things, and are putting it in really accessible, helpful ways, and having accessible conversations about that. I'm seeing you having conversations via the kind of Q&A kind of stuff. And it's really
thank you
great.
for saying that.
And it's important. People
Yeah.
need this conversation. And each of us can, if we're really, really lucky, we can talk for a couple hours a day on Instagram with people. But people need that, and there's a lot of people that need that. So the more of us carrying that weight, the better. The more of us being out there going, hey, I'm a safe person to talk to. I want to help you on this journey. I can't help you in the way that you maybe want, in that I can give you guaranteed answers and make everything okay. but I can help you in the sense of like, I can sit with you and cry at how hard this is, or we can just walk and go, I have no idea. Nope, me neither. Okay, well, let's just hold hands and walk up this hill and see what happens. Like, that's the best we
Um,
can offer right now. But that's a profoundly important thing, I think, for a lot of
yeah,
people. And so it's great. I think it's wonderful what you're doing. It really
thanks.
is. So yeah.
It's been cool too, because I didn't even, whenever I started posting, I didn't even necessarily mean to talk so much about deconstruction specifically.
Mm,
My goal was to just share actual stories from my life and what I've learned, and I'm getting to that. But I started talking about deconstruction for two reasons. One, I wanted, it was kind of an announcement, like to people who follow me and who know me,
mm,
like, hey, like this is because also my Instagram was used previously several years ago as a, like, I had my own business. I was a coach for women of faith and helping professions, and
mm.
everything was very centered around scripture and God. And then and I stopped doing that, and then I just kind of used it as personal, whatever, whatever, I'm doing this today, or you might not hear from me for 3 months, and then like, oh, you see my food one day. but but I so it was just kind of like, hey, this coming from a very different, whatever I'm posting now is coming from a different person, the same person, but from a very different perspective than the last time
Mm.
I've been consistently posting. And it happened to coincide whenever I finally decided to take the jump with Do Better Church starting. And so I was like, okay, well, let me just go ahead and plug Do Better Church at this point. And and then the responses that I got from that was a lot of people who were like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for saying stuff like this. Like, I've been deconstructing and I haven't known like who I can talk to it about it.
Wow.
And I always get worried that I'm going to be judged, like people like you who are such strong Christians, and like, and very similarly and oddly, several people who are my followers, who I know, who I've considered, I'm like, oh, they're really going to hate this. Um, they're probably going to be praying for my soul for for extra now, are ones who've reached out, like, thank you so much for saying this.
Wow.
I'm going through a similar experience,
It's
or I
incredible.
didn't realize these three things were abusive, like they didn't feel right to me, but now that you're putting these words to it, and I know. um and then I also, of course, have the people who are just unfollowing, and I have a little bit of hate. But I also have people who seem to genuinely want to know, like, hey,
Yeah.
how can I show up for a
Yeah.
deconstructing person while I am a Christian but not deconstructing. And
Yeah.
that sparked some cool conversations as well.
Yeah.
So I've stayed on the actual, like, deconstruction part, which I was like, oh my gosh, like now I have all this, like I have different content that I need to create now. And so that's how I ended up on your myths. I was like, well, these have sparked some great conversations in the comments, and I've thought a lot about
Mm.
them. Um,
That's
so
really cool.
maybe, to help those who are deconstructing, to put some verbiage around what they're going through, but then also for these people who are like, how can I support a deconstructing person when I am not? Like, well, these are some of the common things that people tend to believe that aren't true.
Mm.
And so maybe, you can tailor your approach now, knowing, that it's very different than what you perceive it to be.
Yeah.
And I am working on a whole thing specifically about, how to approach someone who is deconstructing from a supportive place,
That's huge.
um,
It's
if
really
you
huge.
aren't.
Yeah. I get a
Yeah,
lot of messages from
a lot of
people that are
responsibility.
going through that, and so, I mean, obviously I get a lot of messages from people going, hey, I'm deconstructing and my partner's fundamentalist and isn't. What can we do? How can we do? Is there any way for this not to end in divorce? And a lot of panic. And there's a few good resources out there. There's not many, but I know David Hayward, Naked
Yeah,
Pastor, just
naked
put out a
pastor.
book on that. I've not looked at it. I don't know how helpful, good it is. I'm assuming it'll be great because
Mhm.
everything I've come across of his is fantastic, but I don't
Yeah.
know. It might be a miss. I don't know. Don't hold me responsible if you don't like it. But it's a whole nother element that we don't often think of, just how hard this is for a fundamental, and I don't mean fundamental necessarily in a negative sense, or just in
Mhm.
a very real, practical, descriptive sense. A fundamental Christian, i.e., life is very black and white, and I know what is right. I know the path that I'm supposed to be on, this narrow path. I know what it is. And suddenly your partner is not on that narrow path. That's a big deal. That's like a bombshell. That is like my world has ended. And honestly, those are some of my favorite people to talk to. And the amount of people that come to me that are in that position going, hey, look, I don't get what the hell you're talking about. And like, I'm trying to follow your page. I'm trying to, and some of it I'm like, okay, I kind of get some, but most of it I'm like, this just makes no sense to me. My husband's making no sense to me right now, or my wife or whatever. But I don't want to love them badly. I want to be able to love them well. I want to be able to figure this out. I want to be able to make it work. How can I do it? Like, the heart behind that is astonishing. It's the same as when I see like a parent come to me who says, my kid just came out as trans or gay, and I have no idea what the hell to do, because everything in me is going, danger, danger, danger. They're burning in hell. You failed as a parent. What will people think? They're the worst thing since Satan incarnate. Kick them out of the house, disassociate, make sure you make everyone else know at church that you don't approve of it.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do any of that. I don't know how to find permission not to do the war that people go on and through. I mean, like, it's a lot for people that are on the other side of that. And so creating resources that help them and give them um just the grace that a lot of people aren't able to as well. I think when you're in the midst of deconstruction and it's quite an early process for you, an early stage, the last thing you want to do is have a very graceful conversation with your abuser, in a sense,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so this person is just triggering you every single way, right? They're constantly bringing up hell and, like, but God says, or the Bible says. Like, that's just a conversation I'm not ready to have. To be able to
Yep.
create resources for that person to engage with, rather than rely on the person that's going through this extremely hard time, that's potentially really huge. So yeah, you need to keep me
Yeah.
posted on that for sure, because I want.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and that's the thing too. Like the people who have messaged me specifically about like having the conversation, um, it's been, obviously there's no one size fits all for anything, but a big thing that I've talked about is the power dynamic of that, and like you as a non-deconstructing Christian needing to be sensitive to that. Like, you, especially if someone is like in the throes of deconstruction and have no, like, everything is like disappearing, and they have no idea
Yeah.
what's real anymore. They're already going to be apprehensive to having a conversation with someone, even if you didn't specifically abuse them, you were in a system that did. And there's already going to be fear that, the only reason you want to talk to me is because you want to reel me back into this. And
Hmm.
those are conversations that I can't have right now. So
Yeah.
both, like, you need to be able, like, you have the power in this dynamic at this time, and you need to be able to show up with no agenda whatsoever, other than, this is my friend, and I want them to feel loved and supportive. and
Mm.
and I go through some specifics of what that looks like, but also I'm like, you may have the purest of intentions, but you send a text to someone like, hey, let's get coffee or whatever, and they say no. Like, you can't take that personally.
Yeah.
And I was like, and don't push it, like, and so, and I create like a whole like something like, hey, I know you're going through a really hard and overwhelming time right now. I want to be able to create a safe space for you as a friend whenever you're ready.
Mm.
Um, and I'm like, and leave them alone, in the sense that you aren't like consistently
Yeah.
asking to have coffee or hang out. Be like, send them a line, let them know that you're still there, but make it about them and who they are and what you miss about
Yeah.
them, and not this, like, not making it about yourself and that I need to hang out with you. And then also, it not being a sort of reconversion, or let me get you back in the clutches before you go
Yeah.
down some destructive path that we can't save you from.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't even know if that's, I mean, I think it's one of my best friends is a Christian, and and still, and I think we've helped each other through this, and there's no judgment, and we're both kind of on our own paths, and when we bounce things off of each other and we figure it out, and we've both grown from it. Similarly, my husband, which I've been very lucky to have a partner who can go through things like this and it not, and not question if he loves me, or if I am the
Mm,
same person, and we've been on we've each been on our deconstruction journeys, and at times they've been very similar and at times they've been very different. Here we are. He still would call himself a Christian, and at this point I would not call
mm,
myself one. So but it's fine, and especially like growing up and having to be equally yoked, in that meaning that you
yeah.
believe the exact same things, and you always will believe those things. I've been very lucky to talk to, and I know you do too, talk to so many people who don't have that experience. And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw the post I did. I mean, it must have been either earlier this week or end of last week, but it was basically saying like, hey, what are your stories for those that are unequally yoked? For those that have gone
mm-hmm,
through deconstruction and a partner haven't, like, how did it work out for you? What are you experiencing? What pains do you have? What victories do you want to share? Like, share. And the spectrum of responses were just fascinating, heartbreaking, encouraging, exciting. I mean, it was a whole mishmash of emotions and stories. But yeah, it doesn't go well for a lot of people. That's it. This is it. Because
mm-hmm,
hey, we signed on a dotted line here, to death do us part, through sickness and health. Sure, I'm with you. For
yep.
better or worse, I'm with you. But as soon as we bring up, oh, wait, but you don't believe in Jesus? Whoa, whoa, whoa. That wasn't even in the contract, because we were so certain that would not even be an issue.
An issue, yeah.
We didn't even think about that. That's why we got married. Like, the primary reason we connected was because at least we were both going to the same church and believed this.
Mm-hmm,
Then on top of that, there was attraction, there was this, there was that,
yeah.
um and it's literally a death knell for a lot of people if they can't navigate that. And I do think, like you, is possible. I've got plenty of friends that are Christian, that have figured this out, and I've had to figure stuff out as well, of how do I communicate well with them and respectfully, and
Mm-hmm,
do life
yep.
with them well. But I think it is possible. It is possible for us to kind of break out of our fundamental black and white approach to life and realize, hey, we can do life together and have slightly different beliefs and engage with some of the same topics in different ways. That's okay. And actually, it might even be good for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Cool.
and I think
Absolutely.
that's key, right? You have to be able to break out of the black and white, and you have to be willing to expand uh,
Mm,
the perspective, whether or not uh, you end up changing your perspective, knowing someone else's perspective, and being okay it is a big deal.
yeah.
And I think as long as you as long as you can do that, then it's certainly workable. But if and that was the thing too, like I'm like, you can't promise a person a safe space though and then not be safe,
No.
because
And that's
you
the thing.
violate that, and it's
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Because that is the danger, in the sense of, these people that are going, well, how can I help my friends that's going through deconstruction? There's a whole like vetting process before you even answer that question, almost, it feels like, because you're like, well, what do you mean by help your friend? What
Yeah,
do you actually mean? And
yeah,
if they're going, I can see they're in pain and I want them to, know that they've got someone to sit with them if they need, and to process, and just an ear to listen. And you're like, okay, you actually want to
mm-hmm.
help.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if they're going, well, I can see they're falling away and they're losing their relationship with God, and I'm worried they're going to hell and we need to get them back on the straight and narrow. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
that's the same
stay away.
intent. You do want to
Yeah.
help. That's help to you,
Yeah,
but it's not going to be helpful for this person.
yeah,
This
mm-hmm.
is not actually a helpful process that you're offering.
Yeah,
And so until they can engage with, like, oh, that's not what they need something very different than what I think help will look like.
mm-hmm.
Because we know, right? We get that text. I posted another post the other day where, you remember the, like, this is blurry and the guy puts his glasses on, and I think it
Yeah.
was like, hey, I've not seen you like in a while, how you doing, or whatever, and he puts his glasses on and the text actually reads, it's like, we noticed you weren't at
I know.
church,
Yeah.
we're counting the weeks, so like, you better get back sooner. But that's how it works, right? These people send these very lovely, well-meaning texts and going, hey, I haven't seen you around in a while, it'd be great to catch up. But you're also like, pastor's wife never sends me texts. Why does she want to
Mm-hmm.
catch up? Oh, she's doing the deconversion, you know,
Yeah.
like, or the
Yeah.
reconstruction back into exactly
Yeah.
what you were. It's like
What you
literally like,
were in.
let's
Yeah.
build the house you knocked down back together out of the rubble.
Mhm.
Don't bring any new parts in here. So
Yeah.
and with the reason we know that is because we've been that person probably on some level, whether
Mhm.
we've actually gone and hunted out people that are going through this process and tried to bring them. We've at least seen that in the church. We've all gone, oh, we better pray
Mhm.
for them. We want them. Again, out of all great intents, based on our world framework, that is people that aren't in this box or not saved or in danger of burning forever. Like, these
Yeah.
are, you know, reasonable. If I thought someone was going to burn if I thought you were going to burn forever in your own, you know, sin and squalor, with Satan sticking pineapples up your butt and whipping you with, like, you know, cat and nine tails for billions of years, I'd probably go, hey, Brit, we got to talk. Like,
You're
we got to figure this out because I'm worried right now. You know, like,
yeah.
I would. And so, like, on some level, you can't hold that against them, but
Yeah.
you got to go, hey, but just a heads up, this is going to
Yeah.
push them further away. You realize this, right? How
Yeah.
much more so when
And
it's
that
your
was,
wife or, you know,
right.
yeah.
And the questions did come from me. It was, I was doing one of your myths, and I said something about either you just end up completely losing your friends, or they just want to, either they just ignore you, or they're coming at you with a let's have coffee. But by that I mean, I want to reconvert you, or I
Yeah.
want to hear the hot gossip so I can tell everyone in prayer meeting, right, what we need to pray for you about. And so thankfully, the people who have reached out so far, they're looking, they're like, well, how can we keep the friend, how can we keep the relationship but not be, um, you know, a person who, and not be someone who the deconstructing person doesn't need right
Yeah.
now. Which is nice to see that people are noticing it, because one of the people too was like, I have been, she's like, I've been walking alongside a lot of people who are deconstructing, and it's interesting to know, like, she's like, by some of their responses to me, I think they may be feeling, that. So how do I keep the relationship
Mm.
but not, impose that on someone? And I some years ago, I was still in the throes of church, certainly in this, I had deconstructed a lot of beliefs, but I was, still super involved. um Loved Jesus, you know and someone, like a good friend of mine, she and her husband had suffered a miscarriage,
Mm.
and it broke them. Um, they were just so, they had tried for so long to get pregnant, and they finally did, and they were keeping it quiet just in case, because she had some fertility issues. But it was like a week before they were like getting to the point where they felt like they could, tell the world, like, we have this bundle of joy and we're so excited. And she miscarried, and it just completely rocked their world. They weren't even sure about their faith anymore. How can a loving God allow this to happen, knowing that we're so excited and this is what we want more than anything in the world? And a few months went past, and they pretty much just ignored any sort of outreach that I tried to do,
Mm.
from a very pure place. And I don't mean outreach in the sense of like evangelizing, just like trying to hang
Yeah.
out with my friends, trying to be there for my friends. And finally one day she agreed to have dinner with me, and I was sensitive to the fact that, like, there, like, there's probably some anxiety about how I'm going to approach this. And so I made sure, like, I let her pick the place. I tried to be very intentional about, like, it being centered around her. And she showed up, and when she saw me, there was just like this huge sigh of relief. And I was like, oh, are you okay? And she was like, yeah. She's like, I just kind of half expected that you'd have 10 other women here with you, like, ready to pray, ready to pray for me and tell me that
Oh
I'm
man.
going down a wrong path. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I would never do that to someone.
Mm.
But then I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I would expect that too, if
Yeah.
if the
Yeah.
roles were reversed. So I get it. But yeah, that's not a good relationship for anyone. And
No.
but there are a lot of things that you have to realize before you can come to the conclusion that that's unsafe, because yeah, you think you are doing ultimately the right thing
Yeah.
by saving a person from a fiery eternity of torture.
Mm.
uh
Wow.
and yeah.
That's huge. So how was you talked about deconstructing these beliefs for years and years and years, bit by bit, kind of whittling away kind of things that you were like, that's not healthy, or there's a better way to see God, a better way to see kind of like Christianity or my faith. But then you talk about in the last kind of year or so, is that right? That you kind of like really were like, I have deconstructed. What was different in that? What was the difference in your like, because you seem to be kind of drawing a line in the sand of like, oh, this was like kind of just like deconstructing some beliefs, and this
Mm.
seems to be something, a whole nother thing.
Well,
Can you
yeah.
talk me through where you kind of draw the line in the sand and what was found on each side, if that makes sense?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, at the beginning it was like there's just like questions arising, like things just not making sense, and so I dig in a little bit to that, and then, but there was always like a stopping point, right? Of like, well, God definitely exists, and these things that I believe about God are definitely true.
Mm,
So, um, just trying to reconcile the two poles that I was seeing in the church, right? And so I became as a little more and more progressive, and definitely was disenchanted with church with actually going to church or participating in church dynamics at different times. And like I said, always kind of just like missed it and ended up back in it. And I would always learn I would always learn more on a positive side, and then I would also learn more of like, oh hey, this is a consistent problem, and like now I've learned to enact boundaries better, and so I'm catching it earlier, or whatever. So but I would say what led to what I call I don't know, a more rapid and deeper deconstruction, which I would say, so I'd say the last year I've been fairly comfortable with, like there are still things that come up that I have to deconstruct, but I'm out of the like whirlwind, overwhelmed, crying, not sure if I want to die. Part of it that was probably like a year or year and a half process before that. So um my husband and I moved to Nashville at early 2017 to take care of my grandfather-in-law. He had been diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer and needed some help, wasn't going to hire anyone. We kind of wanted to make our way back to the Southeast anyway. And was like, well, why not go now? So
mm,
our first year here was mostly spent, he passed away after like 4 months of us being here, but we still helped my grandmother-in-law transition to life without him. And they had two houses on their property. We lived in one. We helped take care of the place. And so during that time, we didn't have a lot of time to try and find a church, right? Like that was like pretty
right.
well a full-time job. Not to mention, I actually had my third miscarriage
Wow.
right before the move, like while we were packing, whatever. And I ended up just going into it was a very like chemical, hormonal depression. And so all the little bit of energy I had that year was put toward that. I um had no extra energy to try to like, let's find a church home or whatever. But
Mm,
um after we kind of got out of the thick of that, the depression, and them not needing, or his grandmother not needing us as much, we're like, okay, well, and now we need to find jobs, and and we need to find a church. And my husband at that point was feeling like he actually wanted to work in ministry, which he actually has a degree in practical ministry, whatever that is. He
that's
doesn't
an
even
amazing
know.
title. Practical ministry.
Practical
It's like
ministry, even the
like a
practical
nice
ministry classes were
backhanded
not.
compliment on everyone else. It's like, well, my ministry degree is practical. I don't know about yours, but
uh, so we were looking at jobs for him in church, and we ended up stumbling across a new church plant here in Nashville that was coming. The pastor was coming from this church in Florida, had a lot of like mega church backers. Like the budget was pretty good, but still, like if you were coming on as staff for the first year, at least you're going to have to, raise support, and then hopefully the church would be able to sustain your salary. And the video they did, like, gosh, it was so good. It pulled all the right heartstrings and had all the right buzzwords. And
Nice.
because here again, buckle of the Bible belt, we don't need another church. Like, you can throw a stone in any
Right.
direction
Yeah.
and you're gonna hit a church. And but this one just seems so different. And anyway, George didn't get the job, but we were still so enamored with the idea of the church that we were like, well, let's go check it out and be a part of it. And so this is an ARC church plant, so they do these things called launch parties, where for months before you have these little get-togethers, but it's like a no pressure thing. There's food. The pastor and his wife tell a little bit about themselves and their heart for planning the church. It's like for 10 minutes, and then that's it. And they actually recommend that you don't do any sort of extra gatherings during this like launch party period, because you want to keep the because everyone's like begging for a worship night or something, but you want to like keep the suspense and not let it filter out too early or whatever, which all I was just kind of like, but the whole, like, they were just like, we want it to be collaborative and come as you are, and we want to meet people where they like, just all the right things that now is like, okay, everyone says this, but it just, I don't know, it felt different. And like where I was still hopeful, like we can pull something like this off and like really be there for people and be a different sort of light, even in this area with all of these churches. And then as we were so into it and so involved, and then it got closer to actual launch day, and then some things were just not sitting quite so well anymore. And then there was, we made a compromise here, and a compromise was like, well, no church is perfect, and so even though we don't 100% agree with this, like, like we've been in this before, we know we can survive it, and then all just like out of nowhere,
all the things you want to say right at the beginning of planting, really, isn't it? No church is perfect. Well, we got through that. We survived it before. It's like, it sounds like we should really dive in.
Right.
Sorry.
And then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, and this wasn't even like because we had, like, it was pretty clear who the core leadership was going to be, and this wasn't even like a meeting with this was actually a launch meeting with like other like people who are meeting us for the first time, and they throw out this this contract that you have to sign. I think I sent it to you. I was like, can I get your thoughts on this? And this was not even just for staff. This was like, if you wanted to greet people at the door for free on Sunday, you have to sign this. And there was a mix of like, the standard things that you would think, and then there were a couple of arbitrary things on there, and then there was a lot of language that was very vague. And I was I happened to see, like, while we were setting up, I saw the contract sitting on a table, and I like broke out in hives. And I texted my husband, and I was like, did you know anything about a leadership contract? And he was like, no. And I was like, they have one. And I like snapped a picture of it real quick, and I sent it to him. And then and so and it also got passed out.
Some, like, whistleblower shit, like taking your photo, uploading it to WikiLeaks, like Julian Assange is like, releasing it from a like Colombian like embassy.
And here's the thing about the launch parties too, is like they were meant to be pretty short. So it was like an hour. Sometimes people would stay a little bit longer at the end and chat or whatever, but it was just an hour of your time. and this is getting closer to the launch, so there actually is like some teaching about who we are. This is where it all went bad, right? With the actual teaching about who
When
we
it's
are.
not just food, you know. They stopped feeding us as much, and they started to talk. I wasn't so big a fan.
And yeah, and then, you know, the pastor got a little long-winded and went a little over, and it was like, okay, well, there's only 5 more minutes left, so here, everyone, is a contract for you to sign if you want to be a part of leadership, and you just, you know, sign your name there, turn it in. The admin's going to be picking it up, and like, see y'all next week.
Wow.
And
You had to sign it
like,
there and then.
yeah, just sign it there and then. Yeah, they didn't explain, you know, like they didn't leave time to explain it because he talks so much about all the other stuff. And
No
so,
time
and
to
I'm
run
like,
it by your lawyer or anything like that. You're just like, sign this, hand it in.
I'm like sitting there looking at this thing, and I'm like, and I'm about to have to go tear down, right? And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, I just like, I don't want to lose. Like, I'm really excited to be a part of this community. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to sign it. I can't sign this. I can't sign this. And so I was just gonna like slip it in my pocket and think about it, pray about it over the week, talk to my husband about it. And then the admin showed up with a pen and just like, and handed it to me, and was just like waiting there expectantly
Amazing.
for me to sign it. And then I have like the associate pastor like, hey, Brit, because I was like heading up a team to put, you know, I was the one who knew how to put things back right or whatever. And I'm just like, and I signed it and I gave it to her, and I immediately wanted to throw up. And so I get through, you know, all the motions of tearing down or whatever. I hop in the car with my husband, and he's like, you didn't sign that, right? And I was like, yeah. I was like, you did, right? And he's like, no. He's like, he stuck it in his pocket, and he walked outside, and he just like went for a walk.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, lucky. And so we just like, we got home and we looked at it and we talked about it, and I sent it to you, and I had this like pit in my stomach all week long. And so we went ahead and we reached out to the pastor, and we're like, hey, we didn't realize this was going to be a thing, and we have some questions around some of the verbiage of this, and you know, want to know exactly what the penance is if you like break one of these things. Like, what kind of, you know, what sort of system are we holding ourselves accountable to here? And the associate pastor ended up meeting with us the following Sunday before the launch party. And honestly, like, he didn't even know this contract was coming. And he, you know, he was more of the like, well, you know, I'm going to sign it. And he's like,
how much worse, right?
People, like, we expect people will not be perfect with this. And I'm like, well, I know that I'm not going to be. And so, you know, because I already, like, I had written them and asked them, I was like, hey, can you like not enter this into a system or whatever? Like, I need to have a conversation about it before, you know, before I've officially signed this. And he was just like, oh, like, he's like, you know, it said no gambling. And we're not like big gamblers or anything, but George's like, I don't want to sign this, and then my buddies are having a poker night, and I want to go, you know, for some fun. And I'm sitting here like, well, I've just lied now. And you know, and there was stuff like profanity on there, and I'm like, well, I guess I can do without that, but I actually love saying these words. and which I'm gonna have to do a whole thing about profanity and how absurd it is that these words are considered bad anyway. So but then the things that I really like had a problem with was like, we expect big things is what it said. And
that's
and
like,
the way that,
if you look at like, you know, like smarter goals or whatever, you know what I mean, like that kind of thing, it's like, this is not very specific, measurable, like attainable,
right.
like big like at any point passing pool saying, look, listen, Brit, here's the thing, we expect big things right now, not so big.
Not so big.
So you gotta be doing bigger, and you're sitting there going, what do I do? Like, how do I get to big? Like, it's such a funny, like,
you know,
vague, like, yeah. Wow.
And by this, and by this time I've learned about boundaries and I've learned about self-care, and I was straight up going in with them too, like, hey, we want to be a part of this, but like, I'm not going to live and breathe this is not going to engulf my entire life, and like it, and yes, I have all of these skills, but I'm only going to offer you these because I can't, like, it just can't have church be my entire life
Yeah.
anymore. And the way that they had talked it, they had like brought up this, we expect big things before, but it was like, we ask for big things from God and we expect big things from God. And I was like, but that's not on here. Like, that's not what it says. And the associate pastor was like, well, I mean, if we expect big things from God, then we're obviously going to expect big things from you too. And I was like,
Sure.
okay, like, what does that mean? He's like, well, and I'm just like, yeah. And nothing that would cause your brother to stumble. And I'm like, that could be literally
Yeah.
anything. Like,
Yeah.
sure, I'll stop sticking my foot out in the middle of the aisle and watching people trip over it, but like, I can't.
But you're going to roll those shorts up past the knee because that's the way you are, Brit. I mean, you've been doing that for
So
years.
I've been doing it for years. It's a little Jezebel over here. So
Oh,
anyway,
man.
just kind of like, no one could give us any real answers, and we were like, well, we can't sign it. And so they were finally like, well, you can come and you can come to the service. We'll expect you at 5 a.m. You need to put up all of this pipe and drape, and then you'll have to take it back down afterwards. And other than that, like, we weren't allowed to greet people. We weren't, couldn't do anything like with worship or any, which was one of the things I said I wouldn't do anyway, but couldn't be a small group leader, which was something that I really wanted to do. And
Sure.
and I just like, it was another one where we stuck it out for a little while. We told them like, hey, if this is all it's going to be, we're, like, we'll help you get started, but we're not going to be here long term. And after a couple of months, it was just very obvious that it was time to move on. And that whole experience is kind of what solidified, like, during that whole experience, especially leaving it, it was like, okay, no more compromising. I need to figure out exactly what I do believe and what's causing me to subject myself to this kind of culture, because it's clearly not working
Yeah.
for me. And so that's when I just kind of went like much deeper and started digging in a lot more and studying things a lot more, which then again, like, more answers led to more questions. And the book The Atheistic Theist, which you recommended, was like a big catalyst for me.
That's
And helped
awesome.
me actually get to the point where I could be like, okay, well, I think I figured most everything else out now. The only thing left is, the only big question left is, does God exist? And who is he if he does? And that was a question that I never, ever, ever thought I would ask. Like, to me, that was always the one thing that was going to be true. And not that it isn't. I don't know. I'm open to there's certainly still some things I can't explain. And again, I can't see myself I don't see myself firmly having a whole set of belief systems ever again, because I feel real duped, especially as someone who has always asked questions, and I'm a very intellectual person in general, but always had sort of a blindness to the Christian belief system because of all the things they tell you. You're not supposed to believe with your intellect, it's faith. And and there's always the filler answers that last for a little while, and then you're like, wait a minute, that's not acceptable. But yeah, that's what that's what I would say drew the line. Like, it was that event. I'm not gonna be like, oh, this church was the reason, but it was that event that just kind of was like the last Jenga piece that came out and cause every other Jenga piece to come into question. So yeah, that
it's really interesting. It's fascinating the things that do spark occasionally, and or just give permission. Like, it's the thing of like, I'm holding back, I don't want to really start looking at the very nature of God or the existence of God, or whatever our line of like, now that's my line. Like, at the end of the day, I know that I'm not going to question that. but there's some of the things that can push us over are sometimes the least likely that we would have guessed would be like that thing. Like, like you're saying, you're like, I've been through enough churches right now. I know if I go through another church, it'll be, we've been through another church, I'll find another church. And but then somehow the next church is the thing that they're like, you know what, why am I doing this? What is going on here? What is it in me that's like, what is, it just fascinates me. Really, it's just really intriguing how, because I'd imagine a lot of the things you went through in that process, they probably didn't surprise as much as it's like, what the, what's that, a contract?
Yeah.
I can imagine from your backgrounds, in different kind of quite extreme kind of movements and stuff, you're like, yeah, contracts. Yeah. I mean, I grew up as a teenager getting quizzed every week on like how often I was masturbating or thinking about guys or whatever. I'm like, okay, some more like religious shit. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Yep. And yet that was, it's a final straw or whatever it is, that just gives us a little bit, just enough permission to go, okay, let's look at the God thing. Let's just have a peek.
Yeah.
It's
And
really
I'll
fascinating.
credit, I'm not like a fan of Bethel anymore or anything, but I will definitely credit them with like, I learned so much from them
Mm,
about freedom. Ironically, so like by this point I got into the point where I was like, okay, I don't like, I'm not going to be controlled by other people or or institutions or whatever. Like, freedom in Christ is freedom. And so signing a contract that takes away freedoms that don't need to be taken away, that aren't
yeah.
hurting anybody, like, why am I going to do that? There's no reason for that.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. But yeah, it's just I love hearing different people's stories, and I love like kind of unpacking this story. It's a fascinating journey. I mean, we were talking on our the Discord server this week, and I think someone mentioned you gave an introduction. Someone was like, "That's
Yeah.
an amazing story. I want to hear more." And I'm like, "This is how I feel with everyone I talk to." I'm like,
Yeah.
"That's such a I need to know more." And it always fascinates me that like on paper I'm very fact and data driven, and so I'm always like, I get really excited about the idea of a podcast with an expert, like like
Mm,
Paul William Young was on recently, or or
yeah.
like a grief expert in the process of deconstruction. I'm like, oh, that'll be fascinating. And yet the podcasts I enjoy the most are ones like these, where I talk to someone I've known for a little while, chat backwards and forwards, if we feel comfortable, but just going, what happened, like just let's unpack this and explore it. Because it just reminds you just how raw, real, human this whole process is. There's so many people that try and demonize this process. There's so many people that try and frame it as one thing or another, but when you actually hear people's stories, you're like, yeah, that seems like a really, yeah, I could imagine that happening. I could, in your shoes, I would have done it that way probably. We've all done it slightly different, of course.
Hmm.
Enough correlation of like, yep, I've been through that, but then enough that we go, oh, I didn't go to that. That's a good thing I didn't go to that church because that sounds like hell.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's utterly fascinating, and I'm really excited that we talk about all this shit and all this abuse and all the crap, and wouldn't wish it on our worst enemies, and yet it becomes this beautiful launch pad and catalyst for us being able to help other people in that situation. And that's a beautiful thing as well, that you have been able to process this to some degree, that you've been able
Mm.
to walk through this. How was it walking through that? Like, was that when you did kind of come to this term of going, okay, kind of thinking like this whole thing, I'm just going to put it down. Was that an easy process? Was it quite hard? Did you struggle with fears, anxieties? Were you quite excited and happy? I mean, what went on in that
All of
initial?
it.
Yeah,
All
yes,
of it.
yes to all of the above.
Yeah. When when that question finally like surfaced as a legitimate next step, like, it was inevitable. I feel like, just like, I think everything, when you're learning something, it's inevitable to ask the next question, and I think, and we were talking a little bit about this too, like, oh, like a little bit afraid to send someone into deconstruction prematurely,
Mm,
right, if they're not ready. And I do think, and this would attest to like the 7 years or so before I went through this like rapid process, like, your system does know, um just like it protects you from trauma, or realizing the trauma that you've had, like it's not going to let you do things before you're ready. The process may still be super difficult and terrible. At one point, you know, suicide was a very real contemplation during
Wow.
the time, but it was like, it's in it. Like, I never thought I would ask this question specifically, is God real? And if so, who are they really? And but it was like, I have to ask it, you know. At this point, it's like everything else has turned out to be very different than I thought it was. So if I start building a whole belief system without questioning this one thing, then I'm always going to wonder, you know. And I truly thought at the time too, like, I'm gonna go through this, and I'm definitely gonna come out knowing for sure that God is real.
Mm,
And that hasn't been that hasn't been the case so far. I definitely have some like evidence both ways, but
mm.
um, I I'm not, you know, there's no like bitterness or weirdness there to people who do believe. Um, but I felt really lost. Ironically, it was like, is this what they mean? Like you're lost and you're found. Like, this is like, I feel really lost right now. And then it was just in that, you know, that was like the cherry on top of already, like, I didn't know. I was just trying to figure out what I believed about anything. It felt I felt very duped, like I said. And so it was like, it was a blow to the ego and the intellect. And it was also just a like, wow, how was I like, not only how was I so blind, but how are all of these people around me like so sure that they could, you know, that we could all be convinced that things were so certain. And yeah, I found myself, and it was just about it, you know, it's just a little over a year ago. It was like the weekend of July 4th, which is Independence Day here.
Mhm.
And I was in a real bad place. And I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I was at the grocery store. I had to go. We were having a thing at our house, and I went to go pick up an ingredient we forgot, and I just like sat there in the parking lot of Kroger, and I was like, I could just like ram my car into a pole, and well, that would really suck if I didn't die.
Yeah.
So I probably shouldn't do it. But you know, just sitting there with this sort of like fantasy of it, or like, you know, I lived on a really dangerous road. I was like, you know, I could do something, and it wasn't. And I just like sat there for a few minutes with whatever rice or whatever in my hand, and I was like, yeah, that would be better than this.
Wow.
And and then I was like, well, um, we're gonna have to do something about it. And so I was like, you know, I also didn't go through all this just to die, I guess. So
Mm.
so you know, finally got my wits about me, went home, and then after like the next day, I was like, all right, let's figure something out. And I just did, so that I wasn't in that space anymore. But
Wow.
it can be very lonely, even with, you know, again, blessed to have a partner to have walked through it the way that we have, and to have a couple of really close friends who who have been absolutely supportive. Not everybody gets that,
Yeah.
but it's still lonely. Like, it still feels lonely, it still feels isolating. It's still a little bit scary to me. Like, my parent, maybe they'll hear this podcast, I don't know, so maybe someone else sent it to them, but they don't know. You
Mm.
know, and it's not that I'll never have the conversation. It's just that already when I'm around them, I have to pick and choose what conversations we have in
Yeah.
order to keep our experience uh healthy at all. And but I do dread the like, I fear for your soul look when the time comes for them
Yeah.
to know anything about this. So uh but I felt for since then, like, you know, I'd say I like pulled myself up after that, and was like, we're we're gonna figure this out. Like, we're gonna be okay. And shortly thereafter, I would say within a couple of weeks, I really felt like I was on the other side. of like the major
Wow.
part of it. And I am someone, we talked about this in the Discord group too, like I like to be in control. I like to know what's coming next. I'm never going to be the person that we go on the kayaking trip and I don't know like what's around, what's around this bend. Like we're not going to get stuck. And so to say
That's
that
funny.
I'm embracing uncertainty in the sense of like, I don't know what the afterlife is. Could be any number of these things, or it could be something we haven't thought about yet, if there's one at all. And and I don't know if God exists, and if they do exist, where is it? Like, did they just create everything? Like, how involved are they? How involved do they care to be? And what expressions are there? Or I don't know. But it's also been very liberating to
Mm.
take that approach to it. Very the pressure is off. I feel like I can explore any line of thinking and listen to anyone's experiences and not have to come at it with any sort of judgment or like fear for my own life of like, what if I decide that I like this and it's terrible, or it's
Mm.
terrible for me, or it's something that's gonna impact my afterlife, or even even my current life. There was one time, I haven't been a person who has so much worried about the afterlife in deconstruction. I
Mm.
talk to a lot of people who are like, what if I'm wrong and I go to hell?
Yeah, it's a big one for a lot of
I
people.
didn't really I didn't really have that.
Mm.
It made sense to me once I decided that hell as I knew it was not a thing. It made enough sense to me that I'm like, oh, I'm not particularly worried about this. But
Mm.
I did have the one thing that did come up for me that was kind of big was in March. I quit my job, and it was a very toxic workplace. Um, and it definitely fed my savior complex in the sense, like, I saw the red flags at the beginning when I took the job 2 years before, but I thought, like, hey, I've survived this. I'm better for it. Like, I know how to navigate this. I can help, which is a trauma response. If anyone out there needs to hear that is a trauma response, to see a red flag and stay. So that deep of a red flag, specifically that's specifically related to trauma you've experienced before. um anyway, I finally, and it was like I got so like in it, and I didn't know, like, there was a lot of narcissism at play from my boss, and just convoluted a whole lot of things. And then whenever it was like, when I finally saw what was happening, I couldn't unsee it, and then it was just like, oh, okay, oh my gosh, I've got to get out of here. So many people are being hurt by this. I'm complicit in this. And so I was leaving, and or when I was trying to figure out, like, okay, I've got to create an exit plan here. I've got to figure out how to do it. And I just all of a sudden got so worried that, it was like, this was the first like major decision I'd made in my life that I didn't consult God
Mm.
for, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if I'm wrong? And like, because I didn't consult God, they're gonna like, this is gonna be a terrible experience, and I'm never gonna find another job, and it's gonna be the worst
Wow.
decision that I've made in my life, and I'm gonna be broke, and all of this stuff. And then it was just like, wait a minute, like, if that is who God is, then I don't want any part of that anyway. Like, if they're gonna ruin the rest of my career and my
Yeah.
livelihood because I didn't say a prayer and ask for guidance on what I'm supposed to do, and leaving a clearly toxic situation, then I don't want any part of that
Funny.
anyway. And then it was fine, and everything worked out really really fine too. Like, amazing things came out of me leaving.
That's awesome.
Um, and so that was just, it was great for me to remember. And then also, for like the first time ever in my life, I actually like praised myself for
Wow.
like, good job, Brit, for recognizing and getting out of a toxic
Yeah.
situation, and for for all of the work that you've put into, and the skills that you've learned to be able to walk into this amazing position that you have now. And like, you did this, and it
Mm.
not
That's
just be
awesome.
oh, it's wee little me over here, and God is big in me, and God did all of this for me. Um, not to say that there isn't a God who helped set this up, but for the very, very first time in my life, I was able to acknowledge my own skill and my
Yeah,
own growth,
it's huge.
as opposed to everything being God.
Yeah. That's so funny though, isn't it? Like, something like hell, which is such a huge, like, I mean, eternal consequence or whatever. And then like something as simple as like, well, I forgot to pray once, and you're like, oh my God, like this is a disaster. It's just funny. I think we're quite similar in that regard though. I always joke with my wife that I'm pretty convinced I'm going to die young, and it will generally be on some level because I'm too principled to back out of some sort of situation. And that is the kind of driving force in me. Like with stuff like hell, I've never ever had existential crisis over hell being correct, the concept of eternal conscious torment and me
Mm,
burning there forever, because I'm like, dude, send me there. Now I know that's a very privileged position to say that from, where I'm like completely
sure,
comfortable in my
absolutely.
house right now, and I probably have to change my tune like 20 minutes into hell. But I'm like, no, screw the God that responds to people that way for
Hmm.
being wrong, thinking he was too good, whatever. If God's that much of an asshole, I don't want to spend any time with him anyway. Send me to the back with Satan.
Yep.
I feel
Hmm.
like more affinity for that guy than this
Yep.
guy. Um, and yeah, I'm just like, yeah, like you, but like you're saying there with that kind of thing of like, wait, so God's gonna like totally screw me over for the rest of my life, not be able to help me have a job, find stability, find purpose in this life because I forgot to pray once, or because I
Hmm.
came to a place where I'm not gonna pray. Like, that seems like a real asshole God. Screw that God.
Yep.
I don't want his help anyway.
Right.
Then screw you. I'll do it on my own. It's that I think there's probably some very unhealthy components to that, and I definitely am working through some of my unhealthy
Hmm.
stubbornness. But I think there's something about finding an inner resolve, an autonomy, individual self, an ego, a discovery of an ego that doesn't get to live in Christianity. It feels like Christianity kills ego before it can exist.
Hmm.
And I think ego needs to be developed before it is put in its place,
Yeah.
before it dies. And I think Christianity is far too quick at killing ego, so that people never actually learn any form of autonomy, any form of self, any form of desire and drive, and at least recognize that that can be a good thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, wow, power to you. Like, that's amazing. Like, it really is.
Yeah.
I love when I hear stories of people and they go, I wouldn't have done that in the past. Or if I had done it, I'd have ascribed that entirely to God. I would have thought, well, yeah, I would never have been able to do that. Like that, it's not, I'm not like that. But God helped me. That was amazing. But to be able to go, no, I have. I've become a better person. I've worked on my skills. I've become more intentional in my relationships and protecting my environment and having healthy, work environment, relationships in the workplace. And yeah, I said, nope, not doing that anymore. Screw you
Hmm.
guys. And then I used all those skills that I've developed to leverage a better opportunity. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's really, really exciting.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of what I think can really keep us going in the deconstruction process, is seeing these victories of like, okay, I'm still, whatever, people waking up in a cold sweat at night going, Jesus, I just dreamt I was going to hell because I thought it was wrong. And my God, that was realistic and terrifying. Yes, we may have some really traumatic moments as we kind of work through some of those very real existential crises and neuroses. But there are these victories along the way as we discover ourselves in new ways, as we discover new ways to explore spirituality, life, our relationships, our work,
Hmm.
whatever it is, finding new purpose that is built through um, a more internally constructed desire and meaning, rather than an externally given desire and meaning, which I think a lot of us, for a lot of our younger years, that's how we operated.
Yep.
um, yeah, it's huge. I just well, the episode before this I just recorded yesterday will be with a guy called Brady Harden. Have you come across him?
Mm-mm.
He's got some great stuff on Instagram and Twitter as well, actually. But he is an atheist now, a secular humanist.
Mhm.
And he, from the age of I think 8, said he wanted to be a pastor and like help people and develop people, like, because his family went through this horrific breakup and real traumatic experience. And at 8, he went to church as a coping mechanism. He went, I think, with his grandmother or something. So there you go. And because that helped him navigate that very tumultuous time. He was like, this is how I help people. This is how I'll help other people like me. And he went through that, the whole process. Ultimately, on some level, birthed out of like an externally given desire to, the desire to help people was maybe a true inner desire, but the mechanism through which he could do that was externally constructed by his trauma and by this this crutch, right, that church had become for him. And so, yeah, it's just really exciting to see people grabbing a hold of their autonomy and seeing how they want to help people. And, you know, you're like, I want to help missionaries, and I see missionaries burning out and, you know, really struggling. And I want to create a safe space for them to be, you know, recharged and energized. And now you're doing very similar work, right? You're finding people that are burning out and struggling in their walk of faith. And you're going, hey, come to me. I'll sit with you. I'll help you. I'll energize you. I'll feed you. I'll give you tools, you know, and whatever it is to make life better for you to be able to do what you feel called to do and passionate about and whatever. You know, you're redefining some of those external components of what was very much part of who you are. And that's exciting to see. Really, really exciting. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm excited to see where it goes.
Me too. Me too. I don't, you know, sometimes I get a little caught up in the like, well, what if I say the wrong thing? And, you know, what if I'm not as informed on this topic as I think I am? But I actually like a little bit of that, because I like to, and part of what I want to do in the storytelling is show the journey. Like, you know, I didn't go to bed one night thinking abortion is murder and then wake up the next day like pro-choice, you know, and I didn't go to bed one day thinking being gay is a sin and then wake up one day fully affirming. There were a lot of, you know, there's a lot of like work and intention throughout the process to get from one to the other. So you know, if I say something wrong or I'm not informed enough on something now, I will, you know, you'll get to watch that process unfold.
Absolutely.
And I'm never going to shy away from apologizing if I do something wrong, you know, for owning up to something. But it is a little terrifying to just get like,
it is.
Oh, I'm going to get ripped apart.
Well, as someone that's been ripped apart a lot and dealt with it better at sometimes and not so well at other times. I mean, you've been following me for 8 years. You'll have seen me get ripped apart occasionally or see me say some stupid things along the way. Hopefully less and less stupid as time goes on, but who knows, you know, like I'm sure in 5 years I'll look back and go, oh Jesus, what did you say? Because that's part of it, right? It's really hard for us not to look back at where we were in the past and go, oh my gosh, what, like, you know, absolute incompetent imbecile was I then, you know? And the truth is we played the best person we could be then, and we did what we could. And absolutely, but it's a beautiful way to learn in some ways as well. It's a very humbling way to learn, but humbling is probably a good thing to learn as well and experience, isn't it? I mean, absolutely. No, I really appreciate what you're doing. I'm excited to see this kind of like start birthing out of you and you emerge onto Instagram, being a voice that is equipping people and helping people. I'm really excited. And so hopefully people should follow you, right? So how do people connect with you if they want to connect with you? Instagram best? Instagram
is probably the best. It's the platform I most use. It's at Brit Herbert, BritHerbert. I have the same handle on Twitter, which I may end up using, if nothing else, just to be able to more easily and quickly create slides of stories, because that's what people seem to want from me, not like a long caption, but actually slides. But it takes a long time to make them all pretty and aesthetically pleasing or whatever. So I may end up just posting everything on Twitter and screenshotting it and bringing it over.
Lazy Twitter screenshot. I love it.
But yeah, that's the main one.
Awesome.
Is Instagram. And
perfect. Well, we'll get those notes in the show links in the show notes for sure. And so people connect with Brittany, follow her stuff, read her stuff, message her and tell her how great a job she's doing. Tell her when she messes up, but do it gracefully.
Please do. Please tell me when I mess up.
And please tell me when I mess up. God, I need that. I really do. My ego, you know. struggle to get my headphones on my head, you know. So
Yeah. Well,
but, it's been great having you on.
thank you for having me. It was really fun. I like had a whole list of things that like might come up, or like if the conversation went dry, I could be like, oh hey, I don't think we talked about hardly any of those things.
That's
But
hilarious.
uh
Well,
but
we'll
yeah,
maybe have to have you
it's
back on
been
at some
fun.
point to work through them all.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
we
Sure.
could do it for sure.
But yeah, thanks so much for suggesting it. I had even thought, you're always like, who should I have on the podcast? And I'm like, man, I would love to be on the podcast, but little old me, I'm not going to ask for that. And so when you're like, you should be on the podcast, I was like, yeah, let's do it. So.
It's really hard for me to like, to figure out who to have on, like, because I think pretty much anyone has an amazing story, you know, and so I think, we chat enough on Instagram that I think it's really hard for me to remember every person I talk to and kind of keep their story in this linear path. Like you telling about the story about the contract. As soon as you said, and I said that contract, I was like, oh yeah, that was you.
I remember that.
I remember
Yeah.
that contract to some degree. I mean, I've seen a lot of contracts, believe it or not. I've had a few sent. I should have kept them all in like some sort of folder. They're just so funny. But yeah, it's very hard to remember every part of every person and then realize, oh, this is who I should have on. This is who I shouldn't have on. Did I lose you there for a second? You froze for a second. But yeah. So it's great to just, we were chatting and I was like, why do I have Brit come on? She's awesome. And I love watching her stories on Instagram. I love her chats. Like, I'm like, you have a good story. Let's get it on the podcast and so people can hear it. For sure. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll chat in the next day or so anyway. So but yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
And we'll have you back on at some point in a few months or something.
Let me know.
Work through your list.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Let me know when it's going to air so I can.
Yeah, I will do. I think I'm running tight on my podcast episodes. When I first started, I was like many weeks ahead, but because I bash out 2 a week, I mean, like you get through them so fast.
Sure.
I got close to, I've got a couple that I recorded and they were like, could you release this in like October the 29th? And I'm like, yeah, but I kind of need to release it tomorrow because I have no more podcasts left. Like quickly just going, who can I have on a podcast? I'm yelling at my wife, do you want to say something for a podcast? So I think fairly soon. I think
I would love to. Has your wife been on?
I keep badgering her. She's slowly coming to terms with being willing to. I think there's a few different components of that. And hey, like I'm not pressurizing anyone to come on a podcast. But yeah, so I think you're about 2 or 3 out. So it'll be a week and a half or so. But I'll definitely let you know for sure.
I definitely, I hadn't listened to a ton of podcasts recently. I don't know why, but I've been like cramming for this and like listen to, I was like, well, I haven't listened to any of Phil's in a while. I need to like, is it changed? I need to listen. So I listened to a ton and,
well, they're not really short. Great. So
no, I do
some serious homework.
I do listen to everything at 2 times speed. So that helps.
Although I got told today by a friend of mine, he was like, I listened to my podcast at 1.3. He's like, you sound like Ben Shapiro at 1.3. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that information.
Faster.
Okay. So I kind of want to go back and listen to myself at 1.3 times. But yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
2 times is it's tough 2 times, but it's the way to go, a little bit faster.
Yeah. Occasionally I have to slow something down, but I try for 2.
I think I speak fairly quickly as well. It's fine when people are like very cadenced and slow. I'm like, speed you up. If I could do that in real time, oh, amazing. But yeah.
Well, and it depends. I think I always kind of go, I'll talk a little bit slow and then I'll get real fast. And but sometimes I'll like watch my Instagram stories and was like, oh my gosh, like speed it up, talk faster. What's wrong with you? And then I'm sure it doesn't help that I listen to podcasts that are like, so in my mind,
you're just racing at all times.
Yeah.
That's
But
funny.
yeah, so I listened to several, and then that led me, I caught up on some God is Gray. And then I finally actually went, after I listened to your podcast with Dirty Rotten Church Kids, I actually finally went and listened to their podcast for the first time. I
So good.
followed them for a while. I engaged with their content, but I had never actually listened to
Likewise.
the
For like
podcast.
months, I didn't listen to their podcast. I'm just like, these are good memes. I love their memes.
Love the memes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
that's
But it was
funny.
good. I'm like, well, now I'm back in it. I'm back in the listening to
There you
podcasts.
go.
So.
Caught up. What was your favorite podcast of late?
Like of yours, or
Just in general,
just
like
in general?
give people a good recommendation for a good podcast.
Yeah. So I absolutely would recommend Dirty Rotten Church Kids podcast. They just have like a great mix of humor with real life stories and collaboration from their followers. But and God is Gray, always just
Yeah, you like her stuff.
amazing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then just
I'm gonna have her back on for sure. We're trying to arrange a time. So yeah.
Anything, if Joe Lumen is a guest on anyone's podcast, listen to that. That lady has so much.
Yeah.
There's so much gold there. Even if like 30% of it is the same story, the rest of it, I promise, is gonna blow your mind in a different way.
I want to get her on again just to like really, really dig deep, because I feel like we heard her story and then bounced around a few different ideas, but I'm like, but that's kind of what she does on all podcasts. And maybe mine is a little longer, so maybe got a bit more depth. But I'm like, now if I had her on, I'd be like, hey Joe, what's up? Let's go. Like, I'm just like, boom. People know your story. They can listen to the last one. Let's do this. You know.
Did you listen to the Dirty Rotten Church Kids podcast?
It's on my list.
I mean, they talk about like they cried. It was profound for me as well. I was just like, oh my gosh. It was like the words that she spoke are like, I don't know, it's like, even though it just seems so individual, like so many people, it seems like it was like, oh, it's as if she was speaking to me and like exactly what I needed to hear in the moment, when it wasn't, she was just sharing. It wasn't even like, it wasn't meant to be anything prophetic or healing to a person. She was just talking about experiences. It's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I needed. And oh yeah, that's what I've been thinking, but I haven't had these words, to verbalize it. It's very, very good. And then a non like deconstruction evangelical type podcast that I love. It's an American history podcast, but with a comedic stance, is The Dollop.
Oh my gosh. As soon as you said with a comedic stance, my brother sent me a link to The Dollop probably about 3 years ago or so. And he was like, dude, he's like, I love this. He's like, I know you have no time for podcasts, but please just listen to this. And it was the one on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I listened to that episode. It was a 2-parter, I think. And I cried my way through it. It was so funny. Like when it started, the first like line of the podcast basically was like, Donald Trump was born to, and then what's his dad's name? Fred Christ Trump. And I was like, and they were like, that's not a mistake. The guy's name is Fred Christ Trump. And I'm just like, I had to pause. I paused and I was like 12 seconds in and I just sent my brother a text and I was like, thank you for this. This is going to be the best. Yeah. They are so funny because it's basically a guy that really knows his history and then his friend who just like constantly bugs him with interjections that are funny.
Doesn't know who the topic is going to be or what the topic is going to be, and they just go for it. There are so many amazing ones. I definitely recommend the Ronald Reagan one, especially if you're someone like me who grew up hearing that Ronald Reagan was the greatest American president ever. You're
fascinating.
You're gonna be in for it. Even if you already knew, like me, like that dude was a little nuts. You're gonna learn a lot of things. Gonna blow your mind.
I need to get
but they also did a mini series, the Dollop UK, which is pretty good, and you might enjoy that.
Oh, I need to check that out as well. Okay. You've got me inspired. I literally listened to that one podcast and was like, that was amazing. These guys are the best thing ever. And then never listened to a single word they said again. And this is how I live my entire life. Like, this is how I read books. This is how I engage with topics. This is how I make friends. I'm like, you're the funniest person I'll I've ever met, I will never talk to you again though, because I'm busy and I've got lots of friends already. Same with podcasts. I'm like, I have like 2 podcasts I listen to right now. I barely get to listen to them. Sorry, guys. For
Sorry.
the best comedic podcast I've ever heard in my life, you didn't make the cut. Like, it's like my standards are just off the charts based on like me not having time. It's really harsh.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll maybe dive in and check the Ronald Reagan
Yeah,
one.
definitely
That's
listen
funny.
to. It's also, excuse me, also a 2-parter, but you won't feel
Yes,
like
it
you
is.
wasted your time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm up for it. I did scroll through all their different stuff and I was like, oh, there's so many things in here I'd love to. Because I
Yeah.
love history. It's one of my favorite things
Same.
to read and
Yeah.
engage with. Yeah, absolutely love it.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Well, anyway, Brit,
Yeah.
I'll let you go.
Yeah, if
Enjoy
anyone's
your evening
still listening at this point.
I know at this point, like if people message you and were like, I love your dollop recommendation, they really listen to this
hey, you
podcast.
made it all the way through.
That's it. You need to, if you're on Twitter, you tweet Brit Herbert and you just hashtag the dollop or something like that. You know, she'll know it's a code that you made it to the end.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's a true fan.
That's it. Yeah, that's
all right,
funny.
thanks, Phil.
All right, love you, Brit. I'll catch you later. Yeah.
You too. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.